The wind was sharp that morning, biting through the layers I'd thrown on as if I hadn't bothered dressing at all. I'd been called to inspect a decommissioned lighthouse along the jagged Maine coast, the kind of place that looks like it's always teetering on the edge of the sea. The waves below pounded the cliffs with relentless rhythm, sending sprays of brine into my face every time I leaned too close to the railing. The old Coast Guard had told me it was routine, a lighthouse no one had manned in decades, automated long before I was even born. Yet the light at the top blinked with perfect, steady precision, as if someone or something was still tending it. I parked my truck on the narrow shoulder of a cliff road that seemed barely wide enough for 2 cars to pass. A thin fog rolled in from the ocean, brushing the windshield with cold fingers. Even the seagulls were quiet, or perhaps just staying low, hiding from whatever chill the morning had brought. As I made my way down the trail, the gravel crunching under boots that felt heavier than normal, I tried to shake off the unease that had started to creep in. A routine inspection, that's all. The Coast Guard had made it clear. Check the generators, the beacon, the structure. Nothing unusual. But the lighthouse had a way of twisting the horizon, making familiar landmarks feel strange and distant. By the time I reached the narrow footpath leading to the base of the tower, the wind had shifted, bringing with it a subtle chemical tang I couldn't identify. Rust? Salt? Or something fouler, something metallic that made the back of my throat dry. I glanced back toward the road. My truck was a pale smudge through the mist, and for a moment I realized I couldn't hear any waves crashing. It wasn't that the sound was muffled, it was gone entirely, replaced by a low, constant vibration beneath my feet, like the hum of some machine hidden deep in the earth. The lighthouse itself was taller than I'd expected, rising like a sentinel out of the gray. Its white paint had long since yellowed with age, peeling in long ribbons that flapped in the wind. The windows were black eyes reflecting nothing but fog and sea spray. As I approached the door, a sense of wrongness settled over me, subtle but insistent. The padlock was gone, and the door creaked open with the slightest push, moving as though it were welcoming me in, though every instinct screamed not to step inside. I forced myself to climb the narrow spiral staircase. Each step groaned under my weight. The interior smelled of mildew and old wood, but beneath that there was something else, smoky, tangy, faintly sweet. The light at the top of the tower blinked on schedule, the Fresnel lens catching the faint gray sunlight and scattering it across the mist in perfect arcs. How could it be working? There had been no keeper for decades. No automated system was meant to handle this old structure with such consistency. My hand grazed the cold brass railing as I climbed, and I swore I felt a vibration run through it, a pulse in rhythm with the lighthouse beam. At the landing before the lantern room, I paused to catch my breath. Outside, the sea roared again, but the sound felt distant, as if filtered through layers of glass. That same vibration thrummed beneath my boots, and then I heard it. A soft, deliberate knocking from above, not on the walls or the glass, but as though someone or something was tapping the lens itself. I froze, my heartbeat loud enough in my ears to drown the sound of the wind. "Hello?" I called softly, my voice swallowed by the fog. Nothing responded, only the rhythmic hum and the occasional knock repeated at irregular intervals. I climbed the last few steps and entered the lantern room. The glass panes were streaked with salt and grime, but the beam of the light remained flawless, rotating methodically over the fog-choked cliffs and ocean. The brass machinery glimmered faintly, polished as though someone had cleaned it recently. The knocking continued, now coming from somewhere behind the machinery, from the shadowed corners where the gears and pulleys met the wall. My eyes searched for any sign of life, any clue, but there was nothing. No footprints, no discarded tools, no note, no sign anyone had been there. Only the perfect rotation of the light and the soft, irregular tapping. I stepped closer to the mechanism, drawn by a compulsion I couldn't explain. The closer I got, the more the vibration under my feet intensified. Subtle at first, now almost palpable in my chest. It wasn't mechanical. I could feel it in my bones, a resonance that made my skin tingle. And then I noticed it. Tiny scratches along the brass, shallow at first, then deepening as if something had been circling the mechanism, endlessly moving, adjusting, tending it. My mind raced, trying to rationalize. Rats? Birds? Maintenance crew? But nothing in the logs indicated anyone had been here in over 30 years. The wind outside rose suddenly, slamming against the glass panes. A cold mist seeped through the cracks, swirling around my ankles. And for the first time, I thought I saw a shadow move across the floor. A figure tall, thin, impossibly still. When I blinked, it was gone, leaving only the hum, the scratches, and the perfectly revolving beam of the light. I backed away from the machinery, forcing rational thoughts to overtake fear. It's an automated system. Nothing more, I muttered to myself, but the vibration didn't stop. It grew, pulsing now like a heartbeat, erratic, insistent. And then the knocking became a sequence, deliberate and precise, almost communicative like Morse code. My stomach turned. My hands were shaking. Whoever or whatever was here, it was aware of me. I couldn't stay. Every instinct screamed to leave, to flee down the spiral stairs and back to the truck. I turned toward the exit. And that's when I saw it. A chair pulled slightly away from the wall, rocking slowly, even though there was no wind inside, no obvious force to move it. The shadow from before stretched from the corner of the room, elongating unnaturally along the floor, reaching toward the chair. I don't remember climbing down the stairs. I only remember the sound of my boots hitting each step, the low vibration under my feet, the knocking that followed me, echoing in my skull. By the time I reached the trail, the fog had thickened, turning familiar cliffs into alien shapes. My truck was there, lights off, just as I'd left it, but I didn't look at it. I ran down the path, the cliff edge to one side and the roaring sea beyond, until my lungs burned and my legs felt like they were giving out. When I reached the road, I stopped. My breath was ragged. My palms were raw from gripping the railing of the truck door. I forced myself to calm down, telling myself it had been some trick of the light, some wind-induced illusion, maybe an old mechanism making noises I didn't understand. But deep down, I knew it wasn't. The scratches on the brass, the chair, the shadow, I couldn't explain any of it rationally. Weeks later, I returned to file the official report. The lighthouse had been closed for maintenance, nothing to indicate anything unusual. And yet, when I drove past the cliffs that evening, I thought I saw the beam, cutting across the fog, precise and steady, just as it had been the day I left. And though no one was assigned there, I could swear I heard the faintest tapping, rhythmic, insistent, echoing through the mist. I've never gone back at night. I don't intend to. But sometimes when the fog rolls in and the wind whistles along the coast, I can still feel the vibration beneath my feet, hear the tapping, and remember the way the shadow stretched across the floor as if reaching for something it could never touch. I can't explain it, and I doubt anyone would believe me. But it's there. The lighthouse with no keeper, keeping watch long after it should have been abandoned, and somehow it knows I've been inside. The weeks after that first visit were a blur of routine and unease. I returned my normal inspections along the coast, checking buoys, tide gauges, and the occasional functional lighthouse, but nothing else unsettled me like that one tower. At night, the memory of the vibration beneath my feet, the pulse that seemed to sync with something deeper than the ocean, haunted my sleep. I kept telling myself it was stress, that my imagination had run wild after hours alone on fog-choked cliffs. But deep down, I knew the lighthouse had been different. Alive, in a way no machine should be. I tried to rationalize the scratches, the chair, the shadow. Maybe some old keeper had lingered too long, leaving subtle signs behind, or a group of vandals had found a way inside. But nothing made sense. I had examined the logs, interviewed colleagues, even checked old Coast Guard records. No keeper had been assigned there for decades. And the mechanism? Perfect. No signs of tampering, no fingerprints, nothing that should have allowed for the flawless rotation of the Fresnel lens. It wasn't until I found the first photograph that the fear came back in full force. I had kept the lighthouse on my mental map, a strange, pressing memory that I couldn't shake. One night, idly scrolling through surveillance footage from a nearby automated weather station, I noticed something in the misty frames. A figure, barely visible, standing at the base of the lighthouse, turning toward the lens as if to check its alignment. I blinked, rubbed my eyes. The footage was taken at the exact moment I had climbed the spiral stairs, yet no one should have been there. No road access, no boat moored nearby. Nothing. The figure was tall, unnaturally still, and its outline seemed to stretch and contract like it didn't quite belong in the world captured by the camera. I zoomed in, trying to make sense of it. And then, in one frame, it disappeared entirely, leaving only the steady rotation of the beam and the gray fog rolling over the cliffs. I felt a cold dread settle over me, deeper than anything I'd felt standing in the lantern room. It was watching, and it knew I had been inside. I returned once more, driven by a mix of professional duty and the obsessive need to prove it was all in my head. The drive along the cliff road was familiar, but the fog was thicker than I remembered, and the wind carried that same metallic sweet tang I had noticed before. My hands gripped the wheel tighter than necessary. By the time I reached the trail, a low hum was rising from the rocks and grass, vibrating against my boots, and I realized the vibration had returned. Not just under my feet this time. I could feel it in my chest, in my skull, a resonance that seemed to synchronize with the lighthouse beam even before I reached the tower. I hesitated at the base, staring up at the peeling white paint and dark windows. The padlock was missing again. The door moved with that same soft, uncanny welcome. I could almost hear it breathing, or maybe it was me imagining it. The spiral staircase loomed, familiar and treacherous. Every instinct screamed to leave, but I forced myself up. Step by step, I ascended, the groaning wood echoing like a warning. The hum intensified as I climbed. When I reached the landing outside the lantern room, the door was ajar. That figure, the one in the footage, was standing just inside. Tall, impossibly thin, shadowed in gray and black, motionless. My voice caught in my throat as I called out, "Nothing." Only the tapping began again, irregular at first, then settling into a deliberate pattern. Morse code, or some signal I was too terrified to interpret? The figure didn't move, didn't acknowledge me, but I felt its awareness, its gaze like a physical weight pressing against my chest. I edged into the room, every nerve screaming. The chair was there again, pulled slightly away from the wall, rocking as if someone invisible had just risen from it. The brass machinery gleamed, untouched, perfect. And then something shifted in the corner. A subtle distortion, like the air itself had bent. My vision tunneled toward it, and I swear I saw movement, a pulsive shape that shouldn't have been, crawling along the walls and floor as though the room itself were alive, bending to accommodate a presence beyond human perception. The knocking increased, sharp and rhythmic, now from every direction at once. The hum vibrated through my teeth, my bones, making it almost impossible to stay upright. I wanted to flee, to leap down the stairs, run through the fog, and never return. And yet, something rooted me in place, a mix of terror and fascination, a compulsion to see, to understand, even as reason screamed to run. I reached out toward the mechanism, trembling, expecting a cold, brass surface. My fingers brushed it, and the temperature shifted instantly, a jarring contrast, warm, almost living. And then I felt it, the scratches under my fingertips, fresh this time, deeper, forming a pattern that seemed deliberate, intelligent. My mind screamed that this wasn't natural, that this was impossible, but the evidence was there, pressing against me like a challenge. I bolted down the stairs, the tapping and humming following, echoing in my skull. The fog outside had thickened to a wall, disorienting and suffocating. I stumbled along the trail, boots slipping on wet gravel, cliffs looming just out of sight. Behind me, I thought I saw a silhouette, stretching unnaturally, keeping pace without sound. Panic lent me speed, but exhaustion followed close, threatening to drag me into the gray maw of the coast. When I finally reached the road, my truck's headlights cut through the fog like a knife. I didn't look back. I never did. The air in the cab smelled faintly of metal and something sweet like copper and decay, and the vibration persisted for minutes after the engine roared to life. I drove in silence, the cliffs and ocean reduced to gray shapes at the periphery of my vision. Weeks later, I returned to file the official follow-up report. Nothing had changed. The lighthouse still listed as closed for maintenance, logs clean, access impossible. And yet, I couldn't shake the memory of the hum, the tapping, the figure, or the scratches. Every night, I felt a subtle pulse in the floorboards of my apartment, heard a faint knock against my walls. Every time I passed fog along the coast, every time the wind shifted, I swore I saw movement in the mist, a shadow tall and thin, waiting, watching, measuring. I've never returned to the cliffs after dark. I've stopped inspecting automated lighthouses entirely. But sometimes, late at night, when the fog rolls in off the Atlantic and the wind whistles in the eaves of my home, I can still feel it, the vibration, the pulse, the tapping. The lighthouse never sleeps, and somehow it knows I've been inside. Even now, I wonder if it's waiting for me to go back. I didn't sleep for days after that last visit. Every time my eyes closed, the lighthouse appeared in my mind's eye, its perfect beam cutting through the fog, the low hum vibrating through my skull. Even in daylight, my vision seemed tinted gray, as if the cliffs and sea had imprinted themselves in a permanent shadow over my perception. My hands shook sometimes, small things like picking up a cup or turning a doorknob, and I could feel the tapping, faint but persistent, echoing somewhere in the edges of my consciousness. Friends asked if I was stressed, if the long hours along the coast were getting to me. I said nothing. I couldn't explain what I'd seen, what I felt, not without sounding insane. Months passed, work continued, but I avoided the Maine coast whenever I could. Still, the fog seemed to follow me in my dreams. And then I started seeing details that weren't there before. A chair slightly askew in my office, the faint, metallic sweet scent when I opened the refrigerator, the subtle vibration under my feet when I walked across the floor at night. Each occurrence was brief, almost imperceptible, yet cumulative. My colleagues noticed my hesitation, my avoidance of certain locations, my nervous glances toward dark corners. I smiled, nodded, and lied, because telling the truth would have been impossible. One evening, I was called to inspect a small, private buoy near a rocky outcrop not far from my old lighthouse. The weather was calm, the fog only a light haze. I walked the narrow path down to the water, and for a moment I felt a sense of relief. Nothing here could possibly resemble the lighthouse. Nothing here could follow me. And yet when I reached the end of the trail, the vibration returned. Softer, almost imperceptible at first, then more insistent, rising in pitch, resonating with the muscles in my legs and back. I froze, scanning the shoreline. The water was gray and calm, mist rolling off it in thin streams, and then I saw it. The light. Not the lighthouse light, too far for that, but a narrow, precise beam slicing across the water from the cliffs in the distance. The cliffs where the lighthouse stood, far beyond the edge of what should have been visible. The beam was perfect, flawless, rotating in its steady rhythm. My stomach sank. Even miles away, even when I had sworn I'd never return, it was still there. Watching, waiting. That night, I couldn't sleep. The vibration under my bed, faint but undeniable, thrummed in rhythm with the lighthouse beam. I could hear soft tapping against the walls of my apartment, irregular, deliberate. I told myself it was the building settling, the pipes, the wind, anything rational, but the fear was visceral, searing. I realized then that leaving the coast hadn't ended anything. The lighthouse had followed me, or at least left a trace, a presence I could not escape. I stopped answering calls for inspections along the coast. I avoided the ocean entirely, sticking to inland assignments, forests, trails, and mountains where the fog was different, where the cliffs didn't fall sharply into roaring waves. And yet sometimes when the wind shifted just so, I swear I feel a pulse in the floorboards, faint and vibrating, and a whisper of that metallic sweet scent drifts past my nose. I know it's impossible, it has to be, and yet I cannot ignore it. Years later, I returned briefly to Maine, not to the cliffs, not to the lighthouse, but to file a report on a separate, unrelated inspection. The road was empty, the fog thick, curling around trees and guardrails like smoke. I didn't look toward the cliffs, didn't allow myself to. But when I reached the highway and the view opened to the ocean, I saw it. A flicker of light through the mist, steady and precise. The lighthouse was closed, unstaffed, supposed to be automated and long forgotten. Yet there it was, cutting through fog and distance as if nothing had changed, as if decades of abandonment were meaningless. I drove away quickly, my hands gripping the wheel until they were raw. The sun was low, orange spilling over the mist, but even as light touched the cliffs, I could feel the pulse, low and insistent, vibrating in my chest. I kept my eyes on the road, forcing rationality to the forefront of my mind. And yet, at the edge of every thought, I knew the truth. Something tended that light, something aware, something that didn't belong. I've never returned at night. I've never tried to investigate further. I've stopped watching the horizon from any cliff or shoreline. But sometimes when I'm alone and the wind whips against the windows or fog rolls in from unseen waters, I feel the vibration under my feet. And I hear it. The soft, irregular tapping, a rhythm that matches nothing in the world but the light from a lighthouse with no keeper. I can't explain it. I don't try. I file my reports, I follow protocol, I live my life. And yet I know it's out there, perfect and patient, watching, keeping its rhythm in the fog. And I know, in some fundamental way, that it remembers me, that it waits, that it has not forgotten. Even now, sometimes when the wind shifts just where I feel it, the vibration, the tapping, and the faint, unyielding sense of being observed, counted, measured, I do not go back, but it waits. I haven't returned to the coast since that last drive past the cliffs, yet it's always there in the periphery of my life, a shadow I can't shake. At first, it was small things, a vibration in the floorboards, a fleeting reflection in the glass of a window, that metallic sweet tang in the air, subtle enough that I could convince myself it was nothing. But over time, the subtle became persistent. The tapping returned more often, irregular and deliberate, echoing somewhere I could never locate precisely. Sometimes I would lie awake, my ears straining, and it would seem to shift closer, following my pulse, my breath, my movement. I started to notice the signs elsewhere. Old buildings with faulty wiring would hum in resonance with that lighthouse beam, shadows that didn't match the objects they clung to, chairs pulled slightly away from tables. My rational mind balked at every instance, yet the evidence stacked in a way I couldn't deny. I couldn't leave it unexamined, and yet approaching it brought a wave of fear that froze me in place. It was like the lighthouse itself had rewritten a boundary around me, an invisible radius in which it exerted influence. Then came the day I realized it wasn't just memories or coincidences. I was working a small inspection inland, away from the coast, in a sparse forest in northern Vermont. The wind was calm, the day clear, and yet as I crouched to examine a trail marker, I felt it, the vibration, low, insistent, thrumming through my bones. I froze, heart hammering, scanning the clearing. Nothing moved, nothing should have moved. And yet from somewhere deep in the tree line, faint and distant but unmistakable, a beam of light traced a slow, perfect arc across the forest. Impossible in its source, impossibly deliberate. I stumbled back, breathing hard. It was the same light, the same rhythm. My rational mind shattered under the weight of recognition. It had followed me. It was no longer bound to the cliffs or the ocean. I felt it watching, measuring, and, most terrifyingly, waiting. I left the forest quickly, returning home in a daze, my stomach in knots. Every shadow in my apartment seemed to stretch unnaturally. Every reflective surface hinted at movement that wasn't there. My life became a careful choreography to avoid any interaction with light, fog, or reflective surfaces, anything that could hint at the presence beyond my perception. Sleep became impossible. Every night the tapping began, subtle at first, then rhythmic, deliberate, like footsteps circling my bed, circling my mind, circling me. The vibration thrummed through the mattress, my body, my chest, my skull. I tried everything, White noise, meditation, relocating. Nothing muted it. Nothing altered the perception. It was patient, constant, inescapable. I realized with a sinking certainty that this presence was not a visitor. It wasn't a localized entity. It had no need to leave. I carried it with me now, internalized, encoded into the very rhythm of my senses. Eventually, I stopped going outside at night entirely. Daylight was safe, but even the sun could not mask the awareness of being observed. Occasionally, when sunlight hit a window at the wrong angle, I would see a faint reflection, a thin, elongated shadow, impossibly still, stretching across the wall. My hands would shake, my stomach would twist. My rational mind tells me it is a trick of light, a trick of perception, but I cannot convince myself. The scratches, the figure in the footage, the rocking chair, they were all real. I remember them too vividly. I remember the vibration, the tapping, the beam cutting across fog and distance. Years have passed since I first stepped inside that lighthouse. Professionally, my life continues. I write reports, I supervise inspections, I maintain a semblance of normalcy. But emotionally, psychologically, I am not the same. I am cautious in ways I never was, hyper-aware of shadows, rhythms, and patterns in my environment. I know the beam still rotates somewhere perfectly, and that the presence I encountered continues to exist, patient and precise. I know without doubt that it remembers me, that it waits for something I do not understand. Sometimes I hear the tapping in my dreams, a rhythm I cannot shake. Sometimes a vibration runs through the floor of my apartment when no one else is home. And sometimes late at night, when the wind shifts and the fog rolls in off the distant ocean, I swear I see it, a faint light cutting across the darkness, rotating with flawless precision, marking my existence, counting my presence, as though the lighthouse and its keeper, whatever that truly is, never left and never will. I do not return to the coast. I do not seek it. I do not acknowledge it publicly. Yet I carry it, always, an unshakable pulse beneath my feet, a tapping in the walls of my mind, a reminder that some places, some presences are patient enough to wait decades, and some forces will find you no matter how far you run. The lighthouse has no keeper, and yet it watches. It waits, and somehow it knows I have been inside. The night doesn't whisper to you out in the campgrounds. It presses, it waits, it stares. I learned that lesson the hard way, and tonight I'm going to tell you why I'll never again mistake the darkness around an RV site for silence. My name's Daniel, I'm 42 years old, and I've been camping in motorhomes, Volkswagens, and beat-up trailers most of my life. I've crossed this country from the rusting coal fields of West Virginia to the high, dry mesas of New Mexico, and I thought I understood what the night held. Coyotes yipping in packs, raccoons raiding the trash bins, winds rolling through the tall pines. But sometimes what waits outside isn't something you can find in a ranger's handbook. Sometimes the night isn't empty. It's watching. I'll start with a campground that most folks wouldn't even call a campground. Just a dirt clearing off Route 93 in Nevada, not far from the town of Ely. The kind of place where you see broken fire rings, beer cans rusting in the dust, and maybe an old boot abandoned by someone who drank too much. I pulled in late, headlights cutting across a sky so open it felt like I could drive straight into the stars. My old RV rattled with every pothole, but I didn't care. I just needed rest. I'd been pushing too many miles that day, trying to make Utah before dawn, and my eyelids felt like they were being stitched closed. I killed the engine, stepped out, and the silence struck me harder than any wind. No insects, no cars in the distance, not even the cry of a night bird. Just me in the Nevada desert, brittle and black under the moonlight. I told myself it was fine. Altitude, maybe, or just the wide stretch of land muffling the usual night songs. I unrolled my sleeping bag inside the RV, cracked a window for the cool air, and let myself drift. The first knock came around 2 a.m. It wasn't a hand against the RV door, not at first. More like something tapping on the glass of the window above my head. A single tick, 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 so faint I almost thought it was a branch. But there weren't any trees out there, just low scrub brush and jagged rock. My pulse jumped, and I lay still, listening. For a minute, there was nothing. Then it came again. Tick, tick, tick. This time I knew it wasn't the wind. I sat up, the RV creaking under my weight, and I stared at the window. Moonlight caught the glass, throwing my reflection back at me. My own pale face, eyes wide, hair plastered to my forehead with sweat. Nothing else. I told myself it had to be a bug, a beetle maybe, or a moth throwing itself against the glass. But I'd camped enough to know the difference between something living and something deliberate. That sound carried intent. When I finally found the courage to peek through the curtains, there was nothing waiting for me. Just the desert stretching away, silver and endless. My reflection wavered on the glass, and I shook my head, muttering that I was just tired, that exhaustion plays tricks on the brain. I shut the curtain and forced myself back into the sleeping bag, but my body wouldn't unclench. My ears strained against the silence, waiting for the next tap. It didn't come, not right away. What came instead was breathing, low, slow, measured, like someone standing outside the RV wall, dragging air in through their teeth and letting it out heavy as though savoring the act of being alive. The sound vibrated through the metal paneling, not loud, but close, too close. My heart hammered so hard it hurt. I wanted to tell myself it was the wind again, slipping into a seam in the RV's frame. But the rhythm was too human, too personal. I reached for the flashlight I kept by the bed, my fingers trembling, knocking over a half-empty water bottle that rolled across the floor. The noise felt deafening in that stillness. When I clicked the beam on and swung it toward the window, the breathing stopped. I waited. Minutes passed, stretching into an hour, until at last I convinced myself it was nothing. Maybe the sound of my own lungs bouncing inside the hollow shell of the RV tricking my ears. I lay back down, eyes heavy, exhaustion finally smothering fear. Sleep dragged me under like a tide. But at 4:17 in the morning, I woke to the unmistakable sound of my RV door handle being tested. The clink of metal lifting, the faint scrape of fingers against the frame. I froze, holding my breath. The handle jiggled once, twice, then held steady as if someone was standing there, deciding whether to try harder. I couldn't see through the curtain without pulling it back, and I didn't dare. My whole body felt nailed to the mattress, every nerve screaming for me to stay still. Whoever it was out there, whatever it was, knew I was inside. The handle eased back into place with a soft click, and then came footsteps. Not the crunch of boots in gravel, not the scurry of an animal. Bare feet against hard-packed earth, soft, deliberate circling the RV. I didn't sleep again that night. When dawn finally burned its way across the desert, painting the scrub brush gold, I forced myself outside. My legs felt like wet rope, but I needed to see, needed to know if it was real. And there they were, footprints in the dust. Not boot prints, not sneakers. Bare feet. Long, narrow, pressed deep into the earth, as though whoever had walked around my RV was heavier than they should have been. I packed up fast and drove until the desert gave way to the first gas station on the highway. The clerk behind the counter watched me with wary eyes, maybe recognizing the look of a man who'd seen something he didn't want to. I didn't tell him. I didn't tell anyone. Until now. That wasn't the only time. Not the only campground where the night taught me fear has no bottom. I left Nevada behind me that morning, but the silence of that desert stayed lodged in my chest like a splinter. I tried to push it away with the grind of the engine, the hum of tires on asphalt, and the comforting rhythm of coffee in my cup holder. But fear doesn't vanish when the sun comes up. It lingers, reshaping the way you notice the world, the way shadows lean, the way certain silences feel thicker than others. For weeks I told myself it had been nothing more than exhaustion, nerves, maybe some drifter wandering through the desert who didn't mean harm. But even as I repeated that story to myself, I knew I didn't believe it. I'd camped near strangers before, and you can always tell when someone's out there by accident or by desperation. This wasn't that. This had been something else. Something that wanted to be close without ever being seen. I thought maybe I'd shake it by heading into greener country. trees, bird song, the sound of rivers cutting through rock, the kinds of places that feel alive in a way deserts don't. So I drove north, following old routes I'd taken years ago, letting the roads carry me toward Oregon. I remembered a campground just outside Tillamook State Forest, tucked along a riverbank, where I'd once spent a peaceful night listening to rain on the roof of my Volkswagen. That memory pulled at me like a rope. I wanted to return to it, to prove to myself that fear was temporary, that campgrounds could still be sanctuary. By the time I rolled into the site, twilight was dripping through the evergreens, long shadows bending across the ground like the trees themselves were leaning in to listen. The place was nearly empty, just one other RV parked a good distance away, its windows dark. I chose a site near the water, close enough to hear the current slipping over rocks. It should have felt soothing. Instead, it sounded like whispers beneath the surface. I set up, built a small fire, and cooked dinner. The flames cracked, the river murmured, and night came down heavy with the smell of wet pine. I told myself this was what I wanted. Nature close, solitude thick enough to swallow every worry. But unease doesn't dissolve just because you want it to. It adapts. It waits for new shapes. It was around midnight when I heard the first voice. I'd been dozing inside the RV. Fire outside burned to glowing embers when it came. A woman's voice, faint but clear, drifting from the direction of the river. A single word, my name. Daniel. I sat bolt upright, every hair on my body standing on end. The air inside the RV had turned cold, so cold my breath fogged as I stared toward the window. I thought maybe I'd dreamed it. Maybe exhaustion had curled into my brain again. But then it came a second time, louder, closer. Daniel. I snapped the flashlight on and swung it toward the window. The beam sliced through the glass, cutting into the trees, but there was nothing. Just dark trunks, glistening leaves, the glimmer of water moving over rocks. No figure, no face. The logical part of me wanted to believe the sound had carried from the other camper, some late-night conversation muffled by distance. But the voice had been too sharp, too deliberate, as if it had been spoken directly into my ear. I clenched the flashlight in my fist and forced myself outside. My boots sank into damp earth as I scanned the shadows, the smell of moss and rain curling around me. The river whispered and churned, silver in the beam of my light. No footprints. No movement. No woman. Still, the voice had felt real enough to pin me in place. And as I turned back toward the RV, my light fell across the window where I'd been sleeping. There was condensation on the glass, not from inside, but outside. A foggy patch shaped like the outline of a face pressed close, lips parted just enough to whisper my name. I staggered back, my chest tight, the beam of my flashlight trembling as I swept it across the trees again. Whoever had been out there wasn't now. Or they were, and they were watching. I climbed back into the RV, locked the door, and sat with my back against it until dawn. Every creak of the frame, every sigh of wind against the trees made me flinch. I couldn't shake the image of that condensation, that breath, lingering on my window. When the sun rose, I forced myself outside, scanning for signs. There should have been tracks in the mud, bent grass by the river, anything to explain it. But the earth was unmarked, clean, as if the forest itself had erased the evidence before daylight. I left that campground without looking back, and I told myself again and again that it had been a trick of my senses, an echo of my own fears given voice. But the truth was heavier than that. The truth was that the night had recognized me. It had called me by name. And Oregon wasn't the last place it would find me, because after that night, it didn't matter where I went, plains, mountains, coastlines. The dark always carried something with it, something waiting for me to stop, to park, to sleep. It followed. I kept moving after Oregon, thinking distance could break whatever thread had tied the night to me. Washington, Idaho, down into Colorado. Miles blurred into the kind of long roads where your thoughts get louder than the radio. I tried to bury myself in the beauty of it. Jagged peaks dusted with snow, fields that swayed like oceans, rivers spilling over stones older than memory. But beauty doesn't protect you. Sometimes it distracts you just long enough for fear to arrive unannounced. The next time it came, it was in Colorado, high up in the Rockies at a campground that was supposed to be safe. Families stayed there. Kids rode their bikes along the gravel loops. Dogs barked happily from their leashes. The kind of place where the rangers smiled at you when you checked in and told you about the best trail to catch a sunrise. If there was anywhere I should have felt secure, it was there. I parked under a stand of aspens, their white bark catching the evening light, leaves trembling in a breeze that smelled like rain. The air was cooler at that elevation, thinner, sharp enough to sting my lungs in a way that reminded me I was alive. Around me, I could hear laughter, the sound of other campers settling in, fires crackling, marshmallows roasting, a human sound, a safe sound. And yet, even with that chorus around me, I felt the shadow in my chest return, like something was waiting for the moment the laughter died down, the moment the last lantern flicked off. I forced myself to join in, to wave at a passing family, to nod at another RVer setting out chairs. I told myself, see, this is normal. This is what it's supposed to feel like. But when night finally laid its weight across the campground, normal was the first thing to vanish. It started small. A sound I thought belonged to the wind at first, a hollow knock, knock, knock against the side of the RV. 3 times, then silence. I told myself it was a branch, but then it came again in a different spot, lower, near the back wheels. Another 3 knocks. I grabbed the flashlight and opened the door. The air hit me cold, damp, carrying the faint smell of pine needles crushed underfoot. My light swung in a wide arc across the picnic table, the fire ring, the gravel. Nothing. Other campers were asleep now. The campground was quiet except for the hiss of wind through the trees. I stepped out farther, boots crunching softly, the light carving circles across the aspens. That's when I heard it. My name again. Only this time it wasn't whispered like in Oregon. It was said flatly, like a statement, from somewhere just out of sight. Daniel. I froze. The word cut through the night without echo, as though the trees themselves had spoken it. My hand trembled so hard the flashlight beam jittered across the trunks. Who's there? I called, my voice cracking. Nothing. Just the trembling leaves, shivering like they were afraid too. I turned back toward the RV and stopped cold. All across the side of the vehicle, in the condensation forming on the metal from the cool night air, were handprints. Dozens of them. Some large, some small, smeared across the panels, overlapping each other like a crowd had pressed their palms there while I'd stepped away. My stomach dropped. I stumbled back, tripping over my own boots, my flashlight clattering against the gravel. When I scrambled to grab it, the beam shot across the RV windows, and in that instant I swore I saw faces peering back at me. Pale, blurred, gone as soon as the light touched them. Panic took me then, raw and unshaped. I bolted into the RV, slammed the door, locked it, and pulled every curtain shut. My heart was hammering so hard I could hear it in my ears, drowning out everything else. Still, I knew I wasn't alone. The knocking came again, all around, circling. The sound of palms slapping gently, insistently, like someone testing every inch of the RV. Not trying to break in, just reminding me they were there. I sat on the floor, back to the cabinet, clutching the flashlight like it was a weapon. Every instinct screamed at me to drive, to leave, to escape. But I couldn't bring myself to open that door again. I was pinned, caught between the fear of what was outside and the fear of what might follow me if I ran. The noise went on for hours, sometimes soft, sometimes sharp, sometimes paired with faint whispers I couldn't quite make out. My name tangled in them, again and again, until I wanted to scream, just to drown it out. And then, just before dawn, everything stopped. The silence was so sudden it felt like being dropped into a void. My ears rang with it. The air inside the RV seemed to ease, like pressure lifting. For the first time all night, I breathed without shaking. When the first rays of sunlight pushed through the curtains, I finally dared to look. The handprints were gone. The metal was dry, clean, as though nothing had ever touched it. No marks in the dirt outside, no sign of anyone. The families around me stirred awake, stepping out of their campers, stretching, laughing, starting fires for breakfast. Life had returned as though the night had never claimed it. But I knew what I'd heard, what I'd seen. And the worst part wasn't that the night had come for me again. The worst part was the growing certainty inside me. Whatever this was, it wasn't random. It wasn't coincidence. It knew me. It wanted me. And it wasn't finished. After Colorado, I thought about quitting the road, selling the RV, finding a small apartment in a city where lights never went out, where neighbors lived so close you could hear their televisions through the walls. Safety in numbers, safety in noise. That thought dug at me during the long drive east, whispering that maybe my years of chasing campgrounds and empty skies were over. But I didn't stop. I couldn't. The road had been in my blood too long, and something in me kept insisting I just needed to find the right place, the right distance, where this thing couldn't follow. Denial is a kind of survival, and I clung to it like a lifeline. I ended up in Kentucky, in the Daniel Boone National Forest. An accident of fate, really. The RV was low on gas, my eyes raw from driving, and a faded sign pointed down a gravel road toward a lakeside campground. I remember the air smelled thick with rain and earth, cicadas screaming from the trees. It should have been comforting, alive in a way the desert and the mountains hadn't been. By the time I pulled into the site, dusk was drowning the sky, painting the lake in bruised colors. I parked under oaks so dense the branches knitted together, blocking out half the stars. Across the lake, I could see the faint glow of another campfire, distant enough to be reassuring, but not close enough to feel like company. I set up, cooked a quick meal, and tried to convince myself I was fine. I told myself this was just another stop, that tonight would pass like any other. The forest air was heavy with moisture, clinging to my skin, carrying the smell of wet leaves and mud. I lay back in the RV with the window cracked, the drone of insects filling the silence. It didn't take long. A ripple across the lake, faint at first like a fish breaking this, then another, and then the sound of water slapping in rhythm, slow, deliberate, as though someone were wading toward shore. I sat up, ears straining, eyes fixed on the slice of lake I could see through the curtain. The splashing stopped. For a long moment there was nothing but the drone of the cicadas. Then came the first whisper. Not from outside, from inside. It rose up from the floorboards, from the very frame of the RV itself, threading through the walls like the forest had found a way in. My name again, dragged out, stretched thin, echoing from everywhere at once. Daniel! My breath caught. I whipped the flashlight beam around the RV, but it only illuminated my own panic. Shaking hands, sweat-streaked glass, shadows that bent wrong against the cabinets. The whisper came again, and this time it wasn't alone. Other voices joined it, overlapping, muttering words I couldn't make out, crowding the air until the inside of the RV felt smaller, tighter. I scrambled for the door, desperate for air, for space. When I yanked it open, the night outside hit me like a wall, wet, hot, thick with the smell of mud. The lake was still, silent, but pressed into the damp earth all around my RV were footprints. Bare, dozens of them, leading from the water's edge straight to where I stood. My chest seized, and for a moment I couldn't breathe. The prints circled the RV, stamped deep into the mud, glistening under the faint light of the moon. Some small, some impossibly large, all headed toward me, none leading away. I stumbled back inside, slammed the door, locked it. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely hold the bolt. The whispers swelled again, rising until I pressed my palms over my ears to block them. And then, knocking. From underneath. The sound came from the floor this time, directly below me, sharp and steady, rattling through the frame like fists pounding from beneath the earth. Each knock reverberated up through my bones, vibrating my teeth until it felt like the whole RV was being shaken apart. I couldn't take it anymore. Panic snapped whatever thread of reason I'd been clinging to. I tore the keys from the counter, lunged into the driver's seat, and jammed them into the ignition. The engine coughed, roared, and the headlights cut through the oaks. The knocking stopped. For a heartbeat, Silence pressed in so deep it felt like the forest was holding its breath. Then, as I slammed the RV into drive, movement flickered in the beams. Figures, half seen, pale, slick with water, stood just beyond the edge of the light. Dozens of them, still as statues, their faces lost in shadow. The oaks seemed to bend around them, leaves trembling as if even the trees were afraid. I didn't wait. Tires spun in the mud, the RV lurched forward, and I tore out of that campground, gravel spitting behind me. I didn't stop until the road widened, until the forest fell away and the night opened above me. Even then, I kept driving. Hours passed in a blur, my hands locked white on the wheel, my mind repeating the same thought over and over. It followed me here. It's not the place. It's me. The realization hit harder than the fear itself. Because if it wasn't the desert, if it wasn't the forest, if it wasn't the mountains, then there was nowhere left to run. I don't remember much of that drive out of Kentucky, just the blur of trees, the wet hiss of the road under my tires, and the constant feeling that if I dared to slow down, if I let the darkness catch me, something would climb into the RV and finish what it started. Every few miles, I glanced at the mirrors, and though I never saw headlights, I swore the shadows shifted differently than they should, as if something was running just beyond the glow of my taillights. By the time I rolled into Tennessee, dawn had turned the horizon pale and sickly. I found a rest stop along the highway, the kind of place with vending machines that never worked and bathrooms painted with graffiti so old the colors had bled together. Other truckers were parked in long rows, engines idling low like beasts at rest. I pulled in beside them, thinking safety lay in numbers, that maybe this thing would retreat with so many people nearby. For a few hours, I let myself believe it. I even dozed off in the driver's seat, the drone of engines around me like a lullaby. But fear doesn't leave so easily, and when it returned, it wasn't with whispers or knocks. It came with silence. I woke to it. No engines, no birds, no sound of passing cars, just a vacuum of stillness pressing against the windows. The sun was high, yet every other truck was gone. Empty asphalt stretched in both directions, my RV sitting alone in the lot like it had been abandoned decades ago. My throat went dry. I climbed out, the heat of the pavement searing through my boots, and looked around. Not a soul. No tire marks leading away, no sign anyone had been there at all, as if the world had slipped sideways while I slept. And then I noticed the vending machine. Its glass was fogged from the inside, handprints smeared across it from within, pale shapes clawing to get out. I staggered back, my pulse roaring in my ears. Every instinct screamed to get into the RV, to drive until the tires shredded, but my body felt heavy, rooted. That's when the glass cracked. A long fracture split across the machine, spiderwebbing outward. From behind the fog, something pressed closer, an outline, thin and human-shaped, lips moving soundlessly against the glass. I couldn't hear the words, but I didn't need to. I knew it was my name. I bolted. The RV roared back to life, tires squealing as I tore out of that rest stop, leaving the machine and its silent prisoner behind. But the silence clung to me, followed me, sat heavy in the air no matter how many miles I put between us. Days blurred again. I barely slept, stopping only for gas, food I didn't eat, coffee that tasted like ash. My eyes burned, my hands shook, and still I pressed on, west this time, as if retracing my steps could undo something. Nevada, Oregon, Colorado, Kentucky, each place had felt like a trap, and yet here I was, driving straight back into the lion's den, daring it to catch me. Maybe that was the point. Maybe fear bends you toward the very thing you're running from, because at least it feels like certainty. When I finally stopped again, it was in New Mexico, at a campground carved out of red rock, the cliffs towering like ancient walls around me. The place was nearly empty, just one or two other RVs parked far off. I told myself I'd face it here, that if this thing wanted me, I was done running. The air was hot, dry, thick with dust that clung to my throat. The sky above burned orange as the sun set, shadows stretching long and sharp across the cliffs. I sat outside by the fire, watching the flames flicker against the rock faces. They moved like dancers, twisting in ways that didn't match the wind. And then the voices started again. Not whispers this time. Laughter. It came from the cliffs, echoing in layers, some high and shrill, some low and guttural, all weaving together until the canyon itself seemed alive with it. The sound climbed over me, pressed into my ears until I couldn't tell if it was outside or inside anymore. I stood, fists clenched, and shouted into the dark. "What do you want from me?" The laughter cut off, sharp as a blade. For a moment, the canyon fell silent, as if listening. And then, from the depths of the rock, one voice answered, "You." The word rolled through the air like thunder, vibrating the ground beneath my feet. My knees nearly buckled. I stumbled back toward the RV, fumbling with the keys, every nerve screaming. Inside, I slammed the lock shut, drew the curtains, and pressed my back against the wall. The voices didn't follow. The laughter didn't return. The silence did. A silence so thick it felt like being buried alive. And in that silence, I realized the truth I'd been running from since Nevada. This wasn't about the places. It wasn't about deserts or forests or lakes. It wasn't even about the night. It was about me. Something had chosen me, and it wasn't going to stop until it got what it wanted. Escape wasn't possible, not in the way I'd been chasing it. The only choice left was whether I'd let it take me quietly or whether I'd stand and face it, no matter what that meant. That night in New Mexico, I didn't sleep. I sat in the driver's seat with the engine off, staring out at the cliffs under the moonlight. Every crack in the rock, every shadow between boulders seemed to hold eyes I couldn't quite see. I thought about driving again. God, I wanted to, but something inside me had shifted. Running wasn't working. Every road, every campground, every escape just led me back to the same place. Hunted, hollow, one step slower than the thing that wanted me. So I stayed. The fire outside had burned down to ash, a faint red glow pulsing like a heartbeat. I watched it die, the silence thick around me, until something strange happened. The air inside the RV grew heavy, hot, pressing against my chest. My ears popped like I'd climbed a mountain too fast. And then came the smell. Damp earth, mold, the sour stench of something buried too long and dragged into the light. I gagged, pressing a hand to my face, but it didn't matter. The air tasted rotten. It seeped into me, filled me, and with it came the sound, knocking again. Not outside this time, not underneath, from inside. The cabinets rattled first, soft knocks against the thin doors, then the floorboards, creaking under invisible steps. My breath caught as the sound circled the RV, slow, deliberate, like someone pacing just a few feet from me. I raised the flashlight, flicked it on, and the beam carved across the space and landed on the mirror. At first, I thought it was my reflection staring back at me, wide-eyed, mouth half open. But then the face blinked, once slowly, and smiled. Not my smile. The light wavered in my hand, sweat stinging my eyes. The face in the mirror tilted its head, studying me, and then its lips moved. "You can't leave." The voice didn't come from the mirror. It came from the walls, the floor, the air itself, a chorus of whispers carrying the same words, overlapping until they shook through me. I snapped. Something in me, fear, rage, desperation, broke loose. I hurled the flashlight at the mirror, glass exploding in a flash of white. The shards scattered across the floor, like the beam rolling wild before sputtering out. Darkness collapsed over me, thick and suffocating. And in that darkness, the RV came alive. Hands pressed against the walls from the inside out, bulging the thin paneling, fingers stretching the metal as though trying to push through. The whole frame groaned under their weight. I backed against the driver's seat, heart hammering as whispers poured out in a flood. My name, over and over, drowning me in sound. I don't know how long it lasted. Minutes? Hours? Time bled into nothing but panic. But somewhere in the madness, I realized the truth buried inside the noise. The voices weren't strangers. They were mine. Every one of them. Each whisper carried my tone, my breath, twisted but unmistakable. Dozens of versions of me, all speaking at once, all calling for me to give in, to open the door, to let them out. I clamped my hands over my ears and screamed until my throat tore. But the voices didn't stop. They only grew louder, pressing, insisting. And then, as suddenly as it had started, silence fell. The pressure in the air lifted, the smell vanished, the walls eased back into place. I sat there in the dark, shaking, tears cutting through the grime on my face. Shards of the mirror glittered faintly under the thin strip of moonlight sneaking through the curtain. One piece caught my eye. I leaned closer, and my reflection blinked at me again. Not in unison, not with me. I stumbled back, slamming against the door, chest heaving. The shard lay still, lifeless, reflecting only the pale ghost of my face now. But I knew what I'd seen. I stayed in that seat until dawn, gripping the wheel like it was the only thing tethering me to reality. When the sun finally crept over the cliffs, painting the red rock gold, I felt a strange calm settle over me. Not relief, not safety. Resignation. Because I understood now. Whatever this was, it wasn't passing. It wasn't going to move on to someone else. It had me. Maybe it always had. The question wasn't how to escape anymore. It was how long I could endure before the thing inside the dark stopped waiting and finally stepped fully into the light. When the sun rose over those cliffs, I should have left. Every part of me screamed to turn the ignition, to let the highway swallow me, to put red rock and ash behind me until the fuel ran dry. But exhaustion pinned me in place. It wasn't just my body. It was deeper than that, like my spirit itself had been hollowed out during the night, scraped raw until I had nothing left but the echo of those voices. So I stayed. The other campers packed up early, their engines groaning as they wound out of the canyon. Soon I was alone, the silence stretching wide again. I told myself that daylight meant safety, that whatever haunted me belonged to the dark. But even in the sun, the RV didn't feel like mine anymore. Every creak of the frame, every tick of cooling metal felt like it carried intention, like the vehicle itself had been claimed. By afternoon, the heat pressed down so hard the air inside shimmered. I couldn't stand it. I grabbed my boots, stepped out, and hiked toward the cliffs. The land smelled of dust and sage, sharp and dry, so different from the damp forests and echoing lakes of the north. For a moment, I thought maybe the desert would burn the fear out of me, cauterize the wound, but the cliffs were waiting. Up close, the rock faces were carved with marks I hadn't noticed from camp. Long, jagged scratches, too straight to be natural, etched into the stone like desperate attempts to claw a way out. Some were fresh, edges sharp as though made just hours before. My skin prickled as I traced them with my eyes, realizing they formed shapes. Letters, words, not random, my name. Again and again, I staggered back, choking on dry air. The sun seemed to flare brighter, the heat pressing until I felt dizzy, the ground beneath me tilting. I stumbled down the slope, dust clouding around my boots, and collapsed beside the RV, gasping. The whispers returned, not from the cliffs this time, from inside me. They coiled up through my chest, hissed behind my teeth, muttered at the edge of my thoughts. Let us out. We are waiting. You can't hold us forever. I slammed my hands over my ears, though the sound was inside, not out. My pulse raced, my vision narrowing to a tunnel. Fear clawed at me, desperate animal. I couldn't take it anymore. Something broke. I yanked the keys, scrambled into the driver's seat, and the RV roared to life in a cloud of dust. I didn't think about where I was going. I only knew I had to move. The wheels spun, gravel scattering as I tore out of the canyon, climbing the winding road that led back to the highway. The cliffs loomed in the mirrors, shrinking, but I swore the scratches followed me, spreading farther each time I looked back. The engine screamed as I pushed it harder than I ever had, miles blurring into a fever dream of asphalt and heat shimmer. My hands locked on the wheel, my jaw clenched so tight it ached. The voices followed. Not outside. Inside. They rose with the rev of the engine, a chorus of me screaming, laughing, pleading. I don't know how long I drove. Hours, maybe days. Time was nothing but a smear. I only remember the collapse when the gas gauge bled empty and the RV sputtered to a stop on some forgotten stretch of desert highway. Silence fell again. I sat there, shaking, my throat dry, sweat stinging my eyes. The desert stretched flat in every direction. No other cars, no towns, just endless heat and sky. For the first time in my life, I felt utterly stranded. No one to call, no one to hear me. And then I realized that's what it wanted. The night had cornered me, step by step, campground by campground, until it had me alone, emptied out, ready to be taken. The sun began to set, dragging shadows across the road, painting the desert blood red. My chest tightened with the memory of every other night, the knocks, the handprints, the faces, the voices. I knew what was coming. I knew it was already here. The first knock came before the last light had faded. Not against the RV, not against glass or metal, from inside my skull. A pounding behind my eyes, steady and slow until my vision blurred with every strike. I gripped my head, groaning, the pain radiating down my spine. The voices surged again, flooding me, louder than ever. "You are ours." I slammed my fists against the wheel, screaming into the dark. My voice cracked, raw, swallowed by the chorus of myself that filled the cabin. I don't remember the words I shouted, pleas, curses, anything to drown them out. My throat tore with the effort, but the voices only laughed. And then silence. A new kind. Not absence, but presence. The kind that makes the hair on your neck rise because you know something is right behind you. I turned, slow, trembling, and in the back of the RV I saw it. Not a person, not a shadow. Me. Standing in the narrow space between the bunks, half hidden in the dark. My own face, pale, lips curled in a smile that wasn't mine. I blinked and it was gone. But I knew then that running wasn't survival anymore. Running was the invitation. Every mile I'd put behind me had only made it stronger, more certain. The only chance left was to stop, to face it, to find out what it wanted before I lost myself completely. That night on the desert highway broke something in me. When I saw myself standing in the back of the RV, smiling in a way no living face should, I realized there wasn't anywhere left to run. Not to the forests, not to the lakes, not to the safety of families roasting marshmallows 2 sites down. The road had carried me across the country, but the truth had followed. And maybe it hadn't followed at all. Maybe it had been inside me from the very first mile. I sat there until the stars thickened overhead, so many they looked like dust scattered across the void. The heat of the day bled into a chill that clung to my skin, and the desert stretched out endless in every direction. The kind of stillness that makes you feel like the last human alive. The voices didn't come back right away. That was almost worse, because silence now wasn't safety. It was waiting. A pause in a conversation I had no control over. I sat, gripping the wheel until my hands cramped, breath coming shallow, eyes darting to every corner of the RV. And then the mirror caught me again. Not broken glass this time, not a shard, not an accident. Just the small rearview mirror hanging from the ceiling above the windshield. I'd looked into it 1,000 times before without thought, but now it held me. My reflection blinked, then it leaned forward. Closer, closer. Until it pressed against the inside of the glass, forehead first, lips peeling back from teeth that were too sharp, too many. "You're tired," it whispered, the words dripping with hunger. "Let us drive." The wheel shook under my hands. Say, my chest squeezed like a fist had closed around my heart, and for one fragile second I wanted to give in, to unclench, to sink, to let the endless road roll on without me. But something inside fought back. Not courage. Not really. More like stubbornness, the mule-stubborn will that had carried me across every state line, every cracked road, every storm. I wasn't ready to hand my life over, not even to myself. I tore the mirror from the ceiling and hurled it against the dash. It shattered into dust, falling across my lap in glittering shards. The voice screamed as it broke, high, piercing, so loud I clapped my hands to my ears. And then, for the first time in months, silence came clean. The air lifted. The pressure eased. For a heartbeat, I thought maybe I'd won. But when I looked up, the windshield no longer showed the desert highway. It showed me. Dozens of me, standing shoulder to shoulder in the darkness, pale faces, hollow eyes, lips moving in perfect unison. Not reflections, possibilities. Versions of myself that had been waiting for this moment, stretching across every choice I'd ever made. "You belong to us," they said together, voices blending like a storm, "and we belong to you." The RV shook. The glass rattled. I pressed my forehead against the wheel, tears stinging hot and fast, and I realized there was no way out, not by road, not by running, not even by breaking glass. The only way forward was through. So I spoke. My voice cracked, raw, but it was mine. Then come. If you want me, come. The air froze. My breath turned to frost in the desert heat. One by one, the faces in the windshield smiled, some kind, some cruel, all mine, and then they faded like smoke swept away by wind. The RV sat still, silent. For the first time in what felt like forever, nothing pressed against me. No knocks, no whispers, no weight, just me, my own breath, and the empty desert. I don't know how long I stayed like that, head bowed, waiting for the next wave. But it didn't come. And slowly, painfully, I began to believe that speaking back, refusing to run, had changed something. Not ended it, no, but shifted it. The night hadn't left me. I could still feel it coiled in my chest, watching, waiting. But it was quieter now, less a predator and more a companion, a shadow that would never leave, but one I could learn to live with. The lesson settled in me like stone. You can't escape what lives inside. You can only face it. By the time dawn burned its way across the desert, painting the horizon in gold and fire, I felt hollowed out but alive. The RV was still mine. My hands still held the wheel, and for one more day, that was enough. I turned the key. The engine coughed, roared, and carried me forward. The road unrolled ahead, endless as always. And in the silence, I whispered to myself, not to the shadows, not to the voices, but to the part of me that still believed in light. I'm not done yet. The desert bled away behind me as the highway carried me east again. But this time I wasn't chasing escape. I wasn't running. I was driving because that's what I've always done. Because movement was the only way I'd ever known how to keep living. The voices were quieter now, like they'd been pushed deeper into the bones of the RV, still there, but content to wait. And in that silence, I finally began to think. Fear is a strange teacher. It strips you bare, tears off the skin you've built from routine and comfort, and shows you the raw nerve underneath. And out here in the campgrounds and forests and deserts of America, fear isn't always a bear at your tent flap or a stranger testing your door handle. Sometimes it's the part of yourself you've been ignoring, the regrets, the doubts, the weight of every wrong turn. The night just has a way of making those things louder, sharper, until you can't pretend anymore. I thought about Nevada, where the desert tapped on my window like it wanted in. About Oregon, where the river called my name in a woman's voice I'd never known. About Colorado, where handprints smudged the RV until it felt like a crowd was pressing against me. About Kentucky, where the lake sent pale footprints right to my door. About the silence of that Tennessee rest stop, the laughter in the New Mexico Canyon, and the mirror that showed me who I could become if I gave in. Each place had felt like a curse, like punishment. But strung together, I began to see something else. A map, a journey. Not of geography, but of myself. The night had been cornering me all along, but maybe it wasn't trying to kill me. Maybe it was trying to teach me what I'd been too stubborn to admit, that you can't outdrive what you're afraid of. You have to face it. You have to look into the mirror, even when the face staring back isn't the one you want to see. I pulled into a small campground in Arkansas a few days later. Nothing special, just a strip of gravel sites by a river, an old picnic table leaning sideways, the kind of place most RVers would skip without a second glance. But it felt right to me. Quiet. Honest. That night, I built a fire. The flames licked high, throwing sparks into the dark, and I sat close, letting the heat wash over me. Every instinct said the silence would return, the whispers, the knocks, and maybe it would. But for the first time, I didn't shrink from the thought. I spoke first. I know you're still here, I said into the night. I know you'll never leave, but I'm still here too, and I'm not running anymore. The fire crackled, the river hissed. Somewhere in the distance, an owl called. And then, for the briefest heartbeat, I thought I heard laughter again. Not mocking, not cruel, almost smiled then. Not because the fear was gone, but because I understood it now. Fear isn't the enemy. Fear is the reminder. The reminder that life is fragile, that the night is bigger than us, that sometimes surviving until dawn is victory enough. When I finally lay down in the RV, the whispers came again, softer this time, curling through the air like smoke. My name repeated over and over, but it didn't crush me the way it used to. It felt almost like prayer. And I slept. When I woke, the sun was streaming through the windows, bright and merciless. The world was still here, and so was I. I know now that I'll never have a normal night at a campground again. Every forest will carry echoes, every lake will hold reflections, every desert will whisper. But that's all right, because the lesson isn't to escape the darkness, it's to carry it with you without letting it take you whole. So if you ever find yourself out there in the middle of nowhere, your RV parked under a sky that looks too big, the silence pressing too hard, and you hear something that makes your skin crawl, don't run. Don't lie to yourself. Face it. Listen. Because fear has something to say if you're willing to hear it. And if the night ever calls your name, don't answer right away. Wait until the sun comes. Wait until you remember who you are. Then speak. Speak like you belong, because you do. That's how I keep moving. That's how I keep surviving. And that's why I can tell you this story, because I faced my night terrors, and I'm still here. I've kept this to myself for years. Even now, I don't know if telling it is the right thing to do, but it's been weighing on me like a stone pressed into my ribs. Maybe saying it out loud will lighten the load, maybe not. I was working out in New Mexico then, out on the plateau country near Black Mesa. People who haven't been there can't quite picture it. It's a land that feels prehistoric, carved in silence, a high desert full of canyons and arroyos and those sudden flat-topped buttes that rise out of the scrub like the ruins of forgotten temples. Out there, the air carries the smell of creosote and dry stone, and at night, the stars are so sharp they don't look like light, but like holes punctured through the sky itself. I was an astronomer working under contract for a research grant. Most of my field work wasn't glamorous. I wasn't some cosmic explorer staring through telescopes at galaxies. I was mapping lunar observations, taking radiation readings, and logging atmospheric data in a place far enough from city light to give me clean results. The plateau region was perfect for it. Quiet, unpolluted, isolated. That isolation was part of the reason I agreed to it. I was going through things in my own life, a breakup, the death of my father, the creeping suspicion that everything I'd studied and built my life around might be as cold and lifeless as the rocks I measured. Out there, I thought I might find something like clarity. I set up camp with a small RV, a beat-up rental parked near the base of the mesa, where the land stretched flat and wide before suddenly rising in red-brown cliffs. The nights were long, but I didn't mind. I would sit out with my equipment, listening to the faint clicking of the instruments, feeling the dry chill settle into my bones. The coyotes would call from miles away, their howls bouncing strangely across the stone, and sometimes I swore I could hear footsteps in the gravel outside the range of my headlamp. But when I looked, there was nothing, just wind and cactus shadows. On the night it happened, I had no reason to think anything would be different. The journals had been reporting a total lunar eclipse, the kind where the moon goes blood red. That alone was enough to make me want to stay awake, to see the whole event from beginning to end. It would be an unusually long one, the kind that happens maybe once in a century, depending on where you're standing on Earth. I remember setting up my scope, the air so dry my lips cracked when I smiled to myself. The equipment hummed, faint vibrations under my palms. The desert was still, except for the sigh of the wind across the sage. I watched the Earth's shadow creep across the moon, cutting it into crescents, into slices, until all that was left was that uncanny red glow. The kind of red that looks alive, like embers in a dying fire. That's when I noticed them. At first, I thought my eyes were playing tricks. On the edge of the mesa, the flat, sheer line of rock against the sky, I saw figures, human-shaped, standing in a row, their outlines barely darker than the darkness itself. I leaned closer to the scope, adjusted focus, but They didn't resolve into anything clearer. They didn't move either. They just stood there like sentinels, staring out into the desert. I told myself it was nothing, a trick of the light, some shrubs catching the eclipse glow in a strange way. But then the moon shifted, just slightly, enough for the Earth's shadow to move again. And in the moment the full moonlight returned, the figures vanished. 1 second they were there. The next, they weren't. I sat there with my throat dry, my notebook half filled with scribbles that now looked ridiculous. Who had I written them for? Myself? Future researchers? Suddenly none of that mattered. All I could think about was what I'd just seen. I forced myself to keep working. I wrote down data, logged times, checked radiation readings, but my eyes kept lifting to that Mesa edge, to the place where I'd seen the silhouettes. Each time I looked, it was empty, just stone and sky. Until it wasn't. I caught movement at the corner of my vision, fast, deliberate. I turned, and there, closer now, I saw a single figure. Not standing on the Mesa edge, but halfway down the slope, motionless, facing me. I froze, hand on the scope. The air felt electric, the hair rising along my arms. And then the moon brightened again, sliding fully out of shadow. The figure was gone. I didn't pack up right away. That would have been the sane thing, but something in me resisted. This was what I'd been waiting for all these months in the desert, wasn't it? Something out of the ordinary, something that pierced through the veil of routine numbers and charts. My whole life had been formulas, data sets, clean patterns. And now I'd seen something I couldn't fit into any graph, so I stayed. Against my better judgment, I sat in my camp chair, shivering in the dry wind, eyes darting between my notebook and the Mesa. I told myself I'd wait it out until dawn. Around 2 a.m, I dozed off. I woke to silence. A kind of silence I'd never known before. Not the usual desert stillness, but something thicker, oppressive. The coyotes were gone. The wind had stopped. Even the hum of my instruments seemed to have fallen away. I sat up, heart pounding. The RV loomed behind me like a block of shadow, its windows dark. The Mesa stretched above, pale in the fading eclipse light. And standing at its base, no more than 50 yards away, were 3 figures. They weren't moving. They weren't making a sound. I tried to rationalize it. Campers? Locals? People drawn out to watch the eclipse the same as me? But who would walk out onto a plateau in the middle of the night, without flashlights, without sound? Who would stand in complete silence, not moving, not calling out? I raised my hand and waved. My voice cracked when I called, "Hello?" The sound died instantly, swallowed by the air. No echo, nothing. The figures didn't move. I stood, legs unsteady, and in that moment the moon slipped fully back into shadow again, turning blood red. And just like before, the figures vanished. I ran, not toward them, not toward the Mesa, but back into the RV, slamming the door, bolting it shut. My breath came ragged. The air inside smelled of metal and dust. I pressed my forehead against the window, staring out, half expecting to see faces pressed against the glass. But there was nothing. The next hours stretched like years. I couldn't bring myself to sleep. I sat in the driver's seat, clutching the steering wheel, watching the sky bleed back to silver as the eclipse ended. By dawn, the desert looked normal again. Birds chattered in the sage. The wind rose in soft gusts, but normal didn't mean safe. I spent the day pretending I could still do my work, writing notes, adjusting equipment, cooking breakfast over the camp stove, but my mind was unraveling. Every time I looked at the Mesa, I expected to see them again. Every sound of shifting gravel felt like a footstep just behind me. By afternoon, I made a decision. I was going to climb the Mesa. It wasn't smart. I knew that. But my reasoning was this. If I could prove to myself that there was nothing there, no figures, no sign of anyone at all, maybe I could put the fear to rest. Maybe I could finish my research in peace. I packed water, a flashlight, a small field radio, and started up one of the old trails that wound along the side. The sun was punishing, baking the stone until the air itself shimmered. I felt like I was walking into the heart of a kiln. The climb was harder than I expected. Loose rock crumbled under my boots. The dry air clawed at my throat. I kept thinking of the figures, of their silence, of the way they had stood so still. My pulse hammered with every step, my body screaming for me to turn back. But I didn't. When I reached the top, the plateau stretched flat and endless, a barren expanse of stone and scrub. The wind swept across it, hot and merciless. There was nothing, no footprints, no cairns or camps, just emptiness. And yet I knew, with a certainty that hollowed my gut, that I was being watched. It wasn't paranoia, it wasn't exhaustion. It was something else, something primal. The way an animal knows a predator is near before it sees it. I felt it like a weight pressing down on me, the silence behind the wind, the heat that seemed to pulse unnaturally. I turned in slow circles, scanning the horizon. Nothing. No movement. Then I saw the stone. At first I thought it was just a boulder sitting near the edge, but as I got closer, I saw it was carved, etched with strange, deep lines that spiraled and cut into each other like labyrinths. Not writing I recognized, not petroglyphs I'd seen before. The cuts were too sharp, too clean, recent. The surface of the stone was warm. Not sun warm, but fever warm, as if something inside it pulsed with heat. That's when the radio crackled. The field radio clipped to my pack hissed, the static sharp against the silence. And through the static, I swear I heard something. Not words exactly, but a cadence, like a voice trying to form sound through water. I staggered back from the stone. The heat against my skin felt unbearable now. My vision swam, and then shadows at the edge of the mesa. Not one this time, dozens, standing in a row, watching. I can't describe the sensation of seeing them like that. It wasn't like spotting hikers in the distance, or even strangers standing too close in the night. It was wrong on a level beneath language. They lined the mesa's edge, their silhouettes too thin, too still, every angle of them sharp against the sky. The eclipse had long since passed, the moon silver again, but they were there all the same. They didn't vanish with the light this time. My breath hitched. The radio hissed louder, a broken rhythm. I pressed it to my ear, half expecting to hear someone calling my name. But the sounds were nothing I could parse. They rose and fell, warped like language stripped of consonants. I wanted to run. My legs felt coiled, ready to launch me back down the trail, back to the safety of the RV. But part of me couldn't move. The figures were so far away, maybe 100 yards. If I ran now, I'd never forgive myself for not trying to see them more clearly. So I stood frozen, every nerve screaming, staring at them, and slowly one of them lifted its arm. Not in greeting, not in warning, just raised it, palm open, facing me. That broke me. I turned and stumbled down the slope, loose gravel skittering under my boots. The descent was clumsy, panicked. I nearly twisted an ankle twice, my pack jerking against my shoulders. I didn't look back until I was nearly at the bottom. And when I did, the mesa was empty again. The stone, the figures, the line of shadows, they were gone. I didn't sleep that night. I locked myself inside the RV and sat with the stove running for light. Every creak of the metal frame made me flinch. I thought about driving out right then, tearing down the gravel road until I reached the highway. But some irrational part of me worried that leaving in the dark would be worse, that whatever I'd seen would follow me, that the headlights would only show me things I wasn't ready to see. By morning, the desert looked harmless again. Sunlight poured over the sage, and the mesa rose calm and immovable. I tried to tell myself I'd imagined it all. Sleep deprivation, eclipse hallucinations. The human brain sees patterns in shadows. It's wired that way. But when I checked the stone again in daylight, it was still there. The carvings, the warmth, too precise to dismiss. That's when the guilt began to creep in. I should have reported it to the rangers, to the university, to someone. But I didn't. I couldn't. What would I say? That the desert was haunted? That shadows had spoken to me through a static-filled radio? No one would believe me. My career would be over. So I said nothing. I buried myself in the research, telling myself I'd leave when the contract ended in 3 weeks. Just hold out, I thought. Collect your data. Ignore everything else. But the desert doesn't let you ignore things. The next nights were worse. It started with the sounds. At first faint, like someone walking through gravel just beyond the circle of my headlamp. Then clearer, closer, footsteps pacing around the RV. I'd grab the flashlight, fling open the door, and find nothing but flat ground and cactus. Then the voices came. Not words I could understand, but murmurs carried on the wind. Always low, always just beyond recognition, like someone whispering through the walls. The worst was the tapping. I woke one night to it. Soft, deliberate taps against the RV windows. I froze, every muscle locked. The tapping moved, sliding from one side of the vehicle to the other. When I finally dared to look, I saw nothing but the reflection of my own pale face in the glass. The figures never showed themselves up close. They never entered the circle of my light, but I knew they were there, keeping me on the edge of exhaustion. By the 10th day, I was unraveling. My notes grew frantic, scrawled. Radiation readings spiked for no reason and fell back to normal within hours. The instruments clicked at irregular intervals, like a Geiger counter detecting something it couldn't identify. That was when I found the second stone. This one was smaller, half buried near the arroyo. I nearly tripped over it while carrying equipment. Like the first, it was carved, spirals upon spirals, lines that bent in ways that tricked the eye. But this one had something else. Embedded in one of the grooves was a strip of fabric, faded, sun-bleached. A fragment of what looked like canvas, maybe from a backpack or jacket. Too fresh to be ancient, too clean to have been there long. I stared at it, my stomach turning cold. Who else had been here? Why had they left nothing but this scrap? That night I couldn't stop thinking about the figures, the way they appeared only in shadow, only when the moon was red, the way they watched me without moving. I thought of the stories locals sometimes told, the ones I'd laughed at when I first arrived. Tales of watchers on the mesas, of people vanishing on nights of strange light. I'd chalked it up to folklore, desert myth. But now I wasn't so sure. I tried to leave on the 12th day, packed the RV, started the engine, drove out onto the gravel road. The sky was a hard, endless blue, the kind of day where you could see for 50 miles. I thought I'd done it. I thought I was free. Then the road ended. Not in the usual sense, not blocked, not washed out. It just ended. The gravel track I'd driven a dozen times before cut off into nothing, the desert flat and unmarked beyond it. No tire tracks, no sign it had ever continued. I got out, walked ahead, searching for where it picked up again. There was nothing, just scrub and stone as if the road had never existed. I turned back, heart hammering, and saw the mesa rising behind me, closer than it should have been, too close. I drove back to camp in silence. That night the moon went red again. Not an eclipse this time, at least not one predicted. The radio had no reports. The calendar showed nothing. But as I watched from the RV window, the moon bled into that same uncanny glow. And on the mesa's edge they were waiting. Dozens of them, maybe more. Perfectly still, perfectly silent. I told myself I wouldn't look. I told myself if I stayed inside, if I kept the lights on, they couldn't reach me. But the tapping started again. Slow, steady, circling the RV. Then came the scratching. Long, drawn-out scratches across the metal walls. I covered my ears, squeezed my eyes shut, rocking in the driver's seat like a child. The air felt heavy, pressing into my lungs. The instruments clicked in spasms, too fast to read. The radio burst into static. Through it, I heard my own voice. Not just a recording, not an echo. My own voice, speaking words I didn't remember saying. "I see you," it whispered. "I see you, I see you, I see you." I screamed. I don't remember deciding to, but it ripped out of me. And in the instant I did, everything stopped. The tapping, the scratching, the radio. Silence. I sat there trembling until dawn, eyes burning, throat raw. When the sun rose, the desert looked the same as it always did. But I wasn't the same. I never finished the contract. I left the equipment, the notes, even my clothes. I just drove until I reached pavement, until I reached people. I never went back. And yet, sometimes when the moon turns red in the sky, I hear it again. That faint static, like a voice trying to climb through the air. Sometimes I wake in the night to tapping against the window, soft, patient. And I remember the way those figures stood on the mesa, watching without moving, waiting for something I still can't name. I don't know what they were. I don't know what they wanted. But I know this. The desert keeps its secrets. And sometimes, if you stay too long under that wide, merciless sky, those secrets see you back. I told myself I was finished with it, that leaving the equipment behind was a small price to pay for sanity. But sanity doesn't return once it's gone. It only changes shape. When I drove away from Black Mesa that morning, the desert was washed gold with sunlight, and I thought that would be enough to keep the fear behind me. Mile after mile, I pushed the RV along county roads, dust pluming behind me like smoke from a fire. Yet something didn't feel right. The horizon didn't shift the way it should have. The land looked the same in every direction, flat scrub, distant cliffs. It was like driving inside a loop. The gauge read half a tank. I knew I should have hit pavement by then, some junction, some sign of civilization, but it never came. I turned the wheel at random, north, east, maybe west, but the road seemed to fold back on itself, the mesa always looming somewhere just behind my shoulder. I stopped only once, to piss by the roadside, and when I stepped back into the RV, I noticed something on the passenger seat, a strip of fabric, the same kind as I'd seen caught in the carved stone. Faded canvas, cut ragged along the edges. I hadn't left it there. I knew I hadn't. I threw it out the window, hands shaking, and drove on. By afternoon, the fuel gauge had dropped near empty. The sun blistered the windshield, and heat waves danced on the horizon. I could feel the edges of panic sharpening in me. I thought about just abandoning the vehicle, striking out on foot, but the thought of crossing that open desert on my own, no water, no cover, was worse. So I kept driving, and when the engine coughed dry, I coasted to a stop on the shoulder. The silence that followed was absolute. I sat with the key still in the ignition, staring through the glass, sweat running into my eyes, and then I saw them again. Not on the mesa this time. Not distant silhouettes, but closer. 3 of them, standing in the road about 200 yards ahead, still as posts, no features, no faces, just shapes against the heat shimmer. I thought maybe it was the mirage. The desert will do that to you, make things appear and vanish like tricks of the light. But they didn't vanish. They held their ground, patient as if they'd been waiting for me to stall. I scrambled to the back, yanked open a storage bin, and pulled out the flare gun I'd kept as a precaution. My hands shook so badly I nearly dropped it. When I climbed back into the driver's seat, the figures were gone, but a new sound filled the air, clicking. Not mechanical, not like the instruments. More organic, insect-like, but louder, deliberate. It came from the scrub on both sides of the RV. A steady rhythm, clicking in unison, moving closer. I fired the flare without thinking, the red streak arcing over the desert. For a moment, the land lit blood-colored, shadows slicing across the sage. I thought I saw movement there, limbs too long, shapes too low to the ground, but the flare fizzed out, leaving only smoke and the heavy silence. That broke me. I packed what I could carry, water, radio, flashlight, and left the RV behind. I walked for hours under the collapsing sun, directionless, guided only by the vague sense that if I kept moving, kept changing position, I might confuse whatever was following me. The desert stripped me down fast. My lips cracked, skin burned, tongue swelled. Each step was a battle. By nightfall, I found myself back at the mesa. It shouldn't have been possible. I had walked away from it, chosen directions at random, but there it was, rising massive and dark against the stars. My knees nearly gave out. That's when the radio hissed again. I pulled it from my pack with trembling hands. Static poured through the speaker, a hollow roar. Then, underneath it, a voice. Not mine this time. It was low, deliberate, syllables drawn out like something learning to mimic speech. You see us. The words came stilted, mechanical, but there was no mistaking them. I dropped the radio, heart pounding so loud it filled my ears. The desert around me felt charged, every shadow alive. I picked up the radio again only to hear a new phrase, warped but clearer. We see you. I threw it into the scrub and ran. The climb up the mesa was madness. My legs screamed, lungs burning, but I didn't stop. Something in me felt dragged toward it, like a magnet pulling at my bones. When I reached the plateau, the air felt hotter than the ground below, as if the stone itself radiated heat. And at the center, I saw them. Not shadows this time, not silhouettes. Figures, standing in a circle around the carved stone. Their bodies looked wrong, elongated, proportions slightly off, as if built from the memory of human form rather than the thing itself. Their faces, if you could call them that, were smooth planes, featureless except for faint depressions where eyes should be. They didn't move as I stumbled forward, didn't step toward me, but I felt them inside my head. A pressure, a crawling under the skin of my thoughts. The carvings on the stone glowed faintly red, pulsing in time with my heartbeat, and in the glow I saw more scraps of fabric caught in the grooves. More than scraps. A zipper, a strip of boot leather, things left behind by others who'd stood where I stood now. I wanted to scream, but no sound came out. The figures lifted their arms all at once, palms open, facing me. My mind filled with that same clicking, so loud it drowned out everything else. It vibrated through my skulls, my teeth, until I thought my head would split apart. And then, darkness. I don't know how long I was out. When I opened my eyes, the sun was rising. The plateau was empty. The stone cold. I was lying on the ground, dust coating my face. My pack was gone, so was the radio. I staggered down the slope, every muscle aching, my skin fever hot. The RV was still where I'd left it, empty, the flare gun missing from its case. This time, the road was there, clear as anything. Gravel stretching out to the horizon, leading away from the Mesa. I drove until the tank coughed dry, then coasted into a ranger station along the highway. The rangers found me half delirious, dehydrated, sunburned. They asked where I'd been, what I'd seen. I told them nothing, just that I'd gotten turned around during the eclipse. They believed me, but I never told them about the stone, or the figures, or the way the road had ended. And yet, sometimes at night, when the moon runs red, I wake to the sound of tapping at my window. Sometimes when I turn on the radio to catch the late broadcasts, the static stretches too long, and underneath it, faint but certain, I hear words. Not mine, not anyone's I know, but words meant for me. You see us, and then softer, we see you. I thought leaving would end it. I told myself all I had to do was get out of that desert, back to the noise and light of civilization, and it would fade like a nightmare after waking. But nightmares don't fade. They settle into you. They grow quiet. They wait. I left New Mexico and never went back. I finished out the contract from home, doctoring data where I had to, telling myself I hadn't lied so much as protected myself. My colleagues asked why I abandoned the field station, why I left expensive instruments behind, and I gave them a practiced answer about equipment failure and health complications. They nodded, accepted it, and moved on. But I didn't move on. At first, it was small things. Static on the radio that lingered too long, stretching thin like someone drawing breath. The faint smell of heated stone in places it shouldn't be. My apartment, my car, the hallway outside my office. Then came the dreams. Always the same. The Mesa rising against a red sky, the stone glowing with spirals, the figures standing in a line at the edge. I'd wake drenched in sweat, my heart hammering, the taste of dust dry on my tongue. The worst was the sound, clicking, soft, deliberate, coming from the corners of dark rooms, sometimes near the window, sometimes from the closet, sometimes from under the bed. Never loud, never frantic, just patient, measured, like a metronome counting down to something. I tried to drown it out with noise, fans, televisions, radios, but nothing worked. The clicking was always there underneath. I stopped talking about it. The one time I tried, over drinks with another researcher, half drunk myself, I saw the look in his eyes. Concern, then distance, then something colder. Pity. So I kept it inside. A year passed, then 2. I moved states, jobs, cities. Each time the first months felt better. Fresh air, fresh start. But the watchers don't care about addresses. Once, in Montana, I woke to find dust scattered across the floor of my apartment. Not regular dust. This was red, fine, the same color as the Black Mesa stone. I vacuumed it, scrubbed until my hands bled, but I knew what it meant. They'd followed me. I've asked myself 1,000 times what they are. Spirits? Hallucinations, something carved out of folklore that latched onto me when I trespassed where I shouldn't have. Sometimes I try to rationalize it. Radiation anomalies, sleep deprivation, something chemical in the stone that warped perception. But none of that explains the fabric I saw. The zipper, the boot leather, the fact that others had been there before me and hadn't walked away. I think about them often, those who came before, whoever left their scraps behind. Did they stand where I stood? Did they see what I saw? Or did they see more, enough that they never came back? Sometimes I wonder if I wasn't meant to leave. The last time it happened, just last month, I was driving home late. The moon was high, nearly full, casting pale light across the empty road. I wasn't thinking about the Mesa. I wasn't thinking about them. I was tired, humming to keep myself awake. And then the radio cut out. Static filled the car, loud enough to rattle the speakers. My knuckles whitened on the wheel. The words came clear, unmistakable through the static. "We see you." I nearly crashed, pulling to the side. My chest heaved, sweat stinging my eyes. When I looked up, there they were. Not on the Mesa this time, but standing in the headlights, 20 yards ahead on the asphalt. Still, patient. Their forms sharper than I remembered. Too sharp. I blinked, and they were gone. The radio went silent. The night was ordinary again, but I knew what it meant. They don't need the Mesa anymore. They never did. Wherever I go, whatever light I live under, I carry them with me now. In the static. In the tapping at windows. In the dust on my floor. And if you've listened this far, if you've followed my words into the dark, then maybe you'll hear them too, one night when the moon turns red and the world feels too quiet. The desert keeps its secrets. But some of them don't stay buried. The first time I heard the bayou breathe, I thought it was just my imagination. A trick of the swamp, some shifting of water and air between the cypress knees that rose like broken teeth around us. But then it came again, low and guttural, like a chest expanding beneath the mud. My wife, Clara, was already in bed, half asleep against the back wall of the RV, and I sat at the little table by the window, listening. The sound stretched into a long exhale, and as it did, I swore the whole RV tilted just slightly, as though it were being rocked in the cradle of something alive beneath the earth. I told myself it was the wind pushing through the trees, or maybe the tide working its way deeper into the channels, but deep down, I felt the truth of it. The swamp wasn't just shifting around us, it was breathing. We had parked on the edge of Cypress Hollow, a tucked-away spot in Louisiana's Atchafalaya Basin that most people avoided. Even locals warned us against going too deep into the hollow. "That swamp ain't right," one old man had muttered at the gas station where we stopped for fuel. He never looked me in the eye, just stared at the pump as though the warning was routine, something he had said 100 times before. But I've always been the kind of man who brushes off warnings. Clara said it was my biggest flaw, my need to see things for myself instead of trusting the word of others. She wasn't wrong. That's how we ended up here, parked among the cypress roots with mosquitoes drumming against the glass and the smell of wet earth clinging to everything. The RV settled as I sat there. It wasn't just my imagination. Something beneath us pulled at the tires, a sucking sound rising as the ground loosened. Clara stirred in her sleep when the sound deepened, like the hollow was taking another breath. She mumbled my name, but I didn't answer her. I was afraid to give voice to the unease building inside me. The air inside the RV felt thick, damp, like breathing through cloth. And then, for the first time that night, I thought about leaving, but I didn't say it aloud. I told myself it was nothing, just the swamp doing what swamps do, expanding, shifting, reminding outsiders like us who it belonged to. I didn't sleep much. The hollow kept me awake with its rhythm, its unseen lung drawing in and pushing out. Every time the exhale came, I felt the RV sink lower, as though the swamp were swallowing us, inch by inch. By dawn, the back tires had sunk deep enough that when I stepped outside with my coffee, the mud slurped against my boots and held me there for a heartbeat longer than I liked. The cypress trees stretched high, their roots gnarled and ancient, and the water between them was black as oil, dotted with floating patches of green. Clara came out, not long after, pulling her sweater tight around her. She didn't mention the sinking, not at first, but I saw it in her eyes, the way she scanned the ground beneath us, calculating how deep we were, how long before the swamp took us completely. "You hear it too, don't you?" I asked her. She looked at me, her lips pressed thin, and nodded. "Like it's alive." I wanted to laugh it off, but I couldn't. The sound had been too real, too steady, too much like a living thing. That morning, the hollow gave us no breath, no inhale or exhale, only silence. And somehow that silence was worse. We spent the day fishing off the bank, or at least I tried to fish. The water was calm, but I couldn't keep my eyes from the surface, waiting for it to ripple with something unseen. Clara barely touched her line, sitting stiff beside me in her folding chair. The air was heavy with the smell of rot, decaying plants, stagnant water, and something sharper beneath it, like iron. I asked her if she smelled it, and she said yes, but she didn't want to talk about it. That was Clara's way. She had followed me across campgrounds all over the South, from Arkansas to Mississippi, never once complaining out loud, but I knew when she was frightened. When she was frightened. She got quiet, too quiet, and her hands trembled just enough for me to notice. By afternoon, clouds gathered low over the hollow, and the shadows of the cypress trees thickened until the water looked bottomless. I swore I saw bubbles rising where none should be, little bursts of air breaking the surface. Clara pointed once, whispering, "There." I followed her finger and saw it. A ripple spreading out in perfect circles as though something just beneath the surface had exhaled. When night came, we sat inside the RV with the windows closed, the hum of the fan doing little to cut the stifling air. I was writing in my journal when the hollow began to breathe again. First the inhale, slow and cavernous, pulling at the mud until I felt the RV lurch. Then the exhale, long and drawn, shaking the glass in the windows. Clara clutched my arm, her nails digging in. "Tom," she whispered, "we shouldn't be here." I wanted to agree, but something inside me wouldn't let the words come. Maybe pride, maybe stubbornness, maybe just the part of me that didn't want to admit fear, not even to my wife of 40 years. I told her we'd leave in the morning, but the truth was, I wasn't sure we could. The swamp had a hold on us now. The hours dragged. The sound of breathing grew stronger, so strong I swore I could feel it in my own chest, as though my lungs were sinking with the hollow's rhythm. The RV dipped lower still, groaning against the weight of the mud. I didn't sleep at all. Neither did Clara. We lay there in silence, listening as the swamp exhaled beneath us, waiting for the moment when the mud would rise through the floor. And in that sleepless dark, I realized something I hadn't wanted to admit. The hollow wasn't just alive, it wasn't just breathing, it was aware of us, it knew we were here, and with every inhale, it was pulling us deeper into its lungs. The next morning, the swamp greeted us with a stillness so heavy it felt staged, as though Cypress Hollow were pretending to be just another patch of wetlands. The fog lay thick on the water, pale white fingers curling around the knees of the cypress, and everything smelled of wet wood and sulfur. I stepped outside barefoot, thinking to gauge just how far the RV had sunk overnight, and the cold slap of mud against my skin made me wince. The back tires were nearly swallowed now. Only the edges of the rubber were visible above the muck, and each step I took sank deeper than the last. Clara called out for me to get back inside, her voice sharp with worry. She didn't need to tell me twice. By the time I reached the door, I had to yank hard just to pull my foot free from the suctioning mud. It clung to me, stringy and unwilling, like the hollow wasn't ready to let me go. I spent the morning trying to rationalize it. Maybe the soil was looser than it looked. Maybe the water table was shifting, softening the ground under us. It was swampland, after all. Things moved. Things sank. But every reason I tried to give myself seemed like patchwork over something I already knew. The hollow wasn't just pulling us down with water and mud. It was breathing us in, slow and patient, like lungs filling with air. Clara made coffee, her hands trembling just enough that I could see the liquid slosh in the cup. She stared out the window more than she drank. "I heard it last night," she said finally, her voice low, steady. "Not just the breathing. I heard humming." I frowned. "Humming?" She nodded, eyes locked on the mist that clung outside. Like something trying to remember a tune. Low, broken. I thought it was in my head, but then it moved. It shifted around the RV. She pressed her lips tight, fighting the tremor that threatened her voice. "I don't think we're the first ones here." Her words sank heavier than the RV itself. I didn't know what to say. Maybe it was the insects. I wanted to tell her, or the creaking of wood. But there was a part of me, an old part, the same that had served me well back when I worked construction, when I could smell the difference between damp earth and rot, that believed her completely. By midday, the sun burned away most of the fog, and the swamp revealed itself in its entirety. Gray water stretching out in every direction, broken only by the hulking trunks of cypress and the occasional flash of white egrets cutting through the still air. It should have been beautiful. And maybe it was, in a cruel kind of way. But I couldn't shake the feeling that the hollow was only showing us what it wanted us to see, like a painted backdrop hiding something deeper, darker. We tried to start the RV just to reassure ourselves we could leave if we needed to. The engine roared to life, but when I shifted into gear, the back tires only spun, flinging clods of mud against the side panels. We weren't going anywhere. Clara's hand gripped my shoulder, and I didn't have the heart to meet her eyes. That evening, the breathing returned. We were sitting at the little table, eating quietly, when it came, long and slow, dragging through the swamp like a storm rolling beneath us. The RV shook with it, the cabinets rattling, the lights flickering as if the air itself was draining away. I dropped my fork, frozen, listening, and then, like Clara had warned, I heard it, a faint tune woven into the exhale. It wasn't words, not quite, but it carried rhythm, like the memory of a song half forgotten. It circled the RV soft as a lullaby and then sank away, lost in the mud. Neither of us spoke. I couldn't. My throat felt parched, my chest locked. Clara's eyes glistened in the dim glow of the lantern. She whispered, "Tom, what if it's calling us?" That night, sleep didn't come. The hollow shifted around us, the breathing pulling stronger, closer, until I swore the walls of the RV themselves swelled and shrank in rhythm with it. I pressed my hand against the floor, and I could feel it, the vibration of something vast, a pulse too deep to belong to any animal I knew. Clara lay beside me, stiff as wood, her fingers laced tight with mine. Hours stretched, and I thought the night would never end. Then, sometime before dawn, I heard voices, not one, not two, but many, tangled together beneath the exhale. They didn't sound like conversation. They sounded like fragments, pieces of thought, names, pleas. One voice rose clearer than the rest, a woman's voice, thin and trembling. "Help me." It came from under us, as if she were buried in the mud, pressed into the swamp's lungs. I shot upright, heart slamming in my chest. Clara squeezed my arm hard, shaking her head, but I couldn't pretend I hadn't heard it. The hollow had spoken. When morning came, the silence was worse than the voices. I walked outside, the mist thinner this time, and saw shapes carved into the mud near the tires. Grooves, as though fingers had raked through it in desperate struggle. My stomach turned cold. Clara saw them too, standing in the doorway behind me. She didn't say a word. She didn't have to. I tried the engine again. The tires spun, and for a moment I thought maybe we'd catch traction. But then the ground beneath us gave another long inhale and the RV sank deeper. The mud swallowed to the rims now, dark water pooling around the base. That was the first time Clara cried. Not a loud cry, not even tears rolling down her cheeks, just a broken sound in her throat, soft and desperate. I held her, staring at the swamp stretching out forever in every direction, and felt a fear I hadn't known since childhood. Not the fear of death, but of being taken, of being claimed by something vast and nameless, something patient enough to breathe us in piece by piece until nothing remained. That night, when the hollow began to hum again, I didn't just hear it, I felt it. The tune pressed into my bones, vibrating against the walls of my chest until it felt like my heart beat to its rhythm. Clara whimpered beside me, covering her ears, but it didn't matter. The sound was inside us now. And then for the first time, I thought I understood what it wanted. The third night came heavy, suffocating, as though Cypress Hollow had drawn in its longest breath yet and was holding us inside it. The air in the RV pressed against my skin, damp and close, as if the swamp itself had crept in through the cracks. Clara hadn't eaten all day. She sat at the little table with her hands wrapped around a cold mug of coffee, staring at the window as though something waited just beyond the glass. I wanted to pull her back, to tell her everything was fine, but the words curdled on my tongue. I couldn't lie to her, not anymore. Not when the RV had sunk so deep the step outside hung just inches above the mud. The swamp exhaled and the floor groaned. I could feel the shift beneath us, the hollow pulling us lower, inch by inch, like a mouth savoring its meal. I pressed my palm to the linoleum and swore I felt warmth radiating through it, like the heartbeat of something vast, slow, and deliberate. Clara broke the silence first. Her voice was brittle, thin. "Tom, it's not just the swamp." I looked at her. She hadn't moved her eyes from the window, her face pale and drawn. "What do you mean?" "I saw them," she whispered. "Out there, between the trees. They stand just far enough that the fog covers their faces, but they're there, watching." Her fingers clenched tighter around the mug, and when the hollow breathes, they breathe with it. My chest tightened. I wanted to dismiss it, say she was tired, that fear was playing tricks. But the truth was, I had seen them too, or at least I thought I had. The night before, when I stepped out with a flashlight, I caught movement in the fog. Shapes that weren't tree trunks, shifting when I moved the beam toward them. I had told myself it was my eyes adjusting, nothing more. But I hadn't believed that then, and I sure as hell didn't believe it now. The hollow inhaled again, and this time the windows fogged from the inside. It was as if the air inside the RV had been pulled out, sucked into the lungs beneath us. Clara clutched her chest, gasping for a moment until the exhale came, flooding the space with warmth so thick it smelled like rot. She doubled over, coughing, and when she looked up at me, tears streaked her cheeks. "I can't take this anymore," she whispered. "Tom, we have to go, even if it means walking." Walking. The thought dug into me like a splinter. The swamp stretched endless, water and mud and shadow in every direction. But she was right. We couldn't stay. Another night like this and the hollow would finish what it had started. I nodded, though my stomach knotted tight. We gathered what we could. Flashlights. A backpack with bottled water. I shoved a handful of protein bars into my jacket pocket. Every sound outside pressed close. The croak of frogs, the whine of mosquitoes, the low, steady hum that had haunted Clara in the nights before. It was louder now, rising from the ground itself, a chorus stitched into the swamp's breathing. When I opened the RV door, the smell hit me first. Earth, wet and sour, but beneath it, something metallic, like blood. The mud reached halfway up the tires, slick and trembling with each breath of the hollow. Clara hesitated, clutching my arm. I led the way down, my boots sinking to the ankle immediately, the suction tugging hard at each step. The fog clung low, curling around our legs like fingers, and the water rippled though nothing moved across it. We hadn't gone 20 feet when the voices returned. Not faint, not hidden, but clear, rising from the swamp around us. Names, broken and desperate, whispered in ragged chorus. Daniel, Martha, Joseph. Over and over until the air swarmed with them. Clara froze, her hand tightening on mine until her nails cut into my skin. And then, like the hollow had been waiting for us, the voices twisted into one word. My name, Tom. It came from everywhere at once, dragging through the mist, rising from the mud under our feet. My knees nearly gave out. Clara pulled me forward, her whisper sharp, desperate. Don't listen. Just move. We pushed deeper between the trees, every step a battle against the sucking ground. The cypress knees rose like teeth, slick and sharp-edged, forcing us to weave through a maze of roots that seemed to close tighter with every breath of the swamp. I shone my flashlight ahead, and that was when I saw them. Shapes, human shapes, half submerged in the mud, shoulders and heads tilted upward as though gasping for air. Their faces were pale, slick with muck, but their eyes, God help me, their eyes were open, watching. Dozens of them, maybe more, scattered between the roots, shifting slightly with each inhale of the hollow, as though they too were part of its lungs. Clara whimpered, pressing against me. "We have to keep going," I said, though my own voice trembled. But when I stepped closer, one of them moved. Its mouth opened wide, mud spilling out, and a sound emerged. Not a scream, not a moan, but a perfect echo of Clara's voice. "Tom?" She cried out, stumbling back, and the figure's head sank lower, pulled back into the muck with the next exhale. The others shifted too, their mouths opening, exhaling the swamp's rhythm, drawing us deeper into the chorus. We ran, or tried to. The mud clung, the roots clawed, and every step felt like dragging myself through quicksand. The breathing followed us, stronger now, pressing against my chest until I could hardly breathe on my own. Clara tripped once, her knee plunging into the mud, and I yanked her up, my heart pounding. Her skin was cold, her breath ragged, but she kept moving, forcing one foot in front of the other. Somewhere behind us, the RV groaned, a long metallic wail as though it were being dragged under inch by inch. I didn't turn around. I didn't want to see it vanish. The hollow exhaled, and the sound surged so loud I swore the trees shook with it. We stumbled into a clearing, the fog pulling back just enough to reveal a pool of black water at its center. Wide, still, like a single unblinking eye. Clara froze at the edge, clutching my arm. The surface rippled, not from wind, not from rain, but from something rising beneath it. The hum deepened, vibrating through the ground into my bones, and a single long inhale dragged through the hollow, pulling at us until I thought my very breath would be stolen. And that was when I understood. The swamp wasn't just breathing. It was feeding. The swamp's inhale dragged at us so hard my chest felt like it might cave in. Clara bent forward, gasping, her hands pressed to her ribs, as though the breath had been ripped straight out of her lungs. I grabbed her, pulled her against me, but the pull didn't let up. It was as though the entire hollow had decided to claim us in that moment, dragging air, mud, and soul together into its bottomless lungs. The pool in front of us rippled once more, and then, God help me, it exhaled. The force knocked us backwards, spraying foul water across the clearing, coating our skin in a film that smelled of sulfur and decay. My flashlight went out, and for one terrifying heartbeat, we were plunged into absolute darkness. Then, from the edge of the pool, shapes began to rise. Not animals, not people, something in between. Their forms dripped with mud, hair tangled with weeds, faces long dissolved until only vague impressions of features remained. They moved in rhythm with the hollow's breath, their torsos expanding and collapsing as though the swamp itself pumped air through their rotted bodies. Clara whimpered, pressing against me. "Tom, what are they?" "I don't know." My voice was hoarse, the words trembling in my throat. "But we're not staying to find out." I tugged her back, away from the pool, away from the rising forms, but the ground itself shifted beneath us. The mud quivered, bubbling, as if the hollow had grown restless, impatient, something slimy wrapped around my ankle, squeezing, pulling. I yanked my leg free with a cry, stumbling into Clara. She caught me, but her eyes weren't on me. They were locked on the shapes gathering from the water. They whispered now. Not the broken chorus from before, but single distinct words. My name. Clara's name. Over and over, like an incantation. Tom, Clara, Tom, Clara. Their voices were wet, burbling, like lungs filled with water. Clara clutched my arm. It knows us. It knows who we are. The panic inside me broke wide open. I pulled her toward the trees, every step a war against the swamp's grip. The cypress knees loomed, sharp and jagged, catching at our clothes. The breathing deepened, following us, sinking with the pounding of my heart until I couldn't tell which beat was mine and which belonged to the hollow. Behind us, the pool churned. I didn't dare look back, but the sound told me enough. The figures were moving, pulling themselves free of the water, their footsteps squelching in rhythm with the inhale. One exhale later, and the fog itself seemed to surge after us, pressing close, dampening every sound except the hollow's relentless rhythm. We stumbled through the trees, but the forest wasn't a forest anymore. It was a labyrinth. The roots twisted into shapes I swore hadn't been there before, blocking paths, funneling us deeper into the hollow. My flashlight flickered back to life, weak and erratic, casting shadows that shifted even when we stood still. Clara's hand never left mine, her grip bruising, her breaths shallow, ragged. Then I heard it. The RV was left, or what was left of it. A long metallic groan carried through the swamp, followed by a deafening crack. The ground trembled under our feet as the hollow exhaled once more, and I knew, without looking, that the RV was gone. Swallowed whole. Our last anchor to the world beyond this breathing nightmare had vanished. Clara sobbed, the sound tearing through me worse than the whispers. "We're never getting out, Tom." "Yes, we are." I didn't believe it, not fully, but I couldn't let her see that. "We just have to keep moving." We broke into what could barely be called a run, our legs dragging through mud that seemed to thicken with every step. Branches tore at our skin, mosquitoes swarmed our faces, and still the whispering followed. Sometimes ahead of us, sometimes behind, sometimes beneath. Every inhale of the hollow pulled us deeper, every exhale pushed the voices closer. And then, suddenly, silence. The breathing stopped. We staggered into another clearing, chest heaving, sweat stinging our eyes. For the first time since the nightmare began, the hollow was still. No inhale, no exhale. Just the heavy, oppressive quiet of a swamp holding its breath. Clara gripped my arm, like her voice trembling. "Why did it stop?" I didn't have an answer, but the stillness pressed against us harder than the breathing ever had. A suffocating weight that told me the hollow wasn't finished. It was only waiting. And then the ground beneath us buckled. It started as a shiver, a faint tremor that rattled the cypress knees. Then the mud split wide, and the earth itself seemed to inhale all at once. The force yanked at us with such violence, Clara was torn from my grasp. She screamed, sliding backward toward the gaping fissure opening in the swamp floor. I lunged for her, my fingers catching hers just as her legs disappeared into the sucking mud. Her nails cut into my skin, her eyes wide with terror. "Don't let go," she cried. "I won't," I shouted, my voice raw. I pulled with everything I had, but the swamp pulled harder. Her body sank inch by inch, the mud swallowing her waist, her chest, her shoulders. The hollow exhaled, and the stench of rot and decay surged around us. Her grip weakened, slick with mud, her eyes filling with tears. "Tom." And then, as if deciding I wasn't enough, the swamp exhaled harder. The pull ripped her from my hands. Clara's scream echoed through the hollow as she disappeared beneath the surface, her voice cut off like a candle snuffed out. I fell to my knees, clawing at the mud, screaming her name. My hands sank deep, grabbing nothing but sludge, foul and warm. The breathing returned, stronger than ever, vibrating through my chest until I thought my ribs would shatter. I pounded my fists against the ground, the swamp answering with another inhale, sucking the air from my lungs. I realized then, this wasn't panic anymore. This was finality. The hollow wasn't just feeding. It was choosing, and it had chosen Clara. And now, it was coming for me. I don't remember standing, but somehow I was on my feet, stumbling backward as the hollow roared through its next exhale. The sound wasn't just noise anymore. It was voices. Thousands of them, layered over each other, too many to distinguish. Some shrieked, some prayed, some sang, and threaded through all of it was Clara's voice, faint, swallowed into the chorus. My knees nearly buckled hearing her, the sound of her breath inside something that wasn't hers anymore. I ran, not toward safety. I didn't even know what that word meant anymore, but away from the fissure that had devoured my wife. My boots slipped in the muck, sucking and tearing as though the swamp wanted to hold me back, but adrenaline pushed me forward. Every breath I took burned, my lungs fighting against the rhythm of the hollows. It was like breathing in smoke, each inhale fouled with rot and stagnant water. The trees loomed ahead, their roots tangled like cages. My flashlight flickered and died, plunging me into a darkness thick enough to choke on. I kept moving blind, crashing through brush, slamming against cypress knees, the swamp's breathing pounding in my ears louder than my heartbeat. And then the silence came again. No inhale, no exhale, no voices. The world froze, every insect, every ripple of water stilled. The quiet was unbearable, as though the swamp itself leaned close, waiting for me to take one more step. I stopped. I couldn't help it. My breath came fast, ragged, far too loud in the silence. And that was when I heard it, a sound that didn't belong. Footsteps behind me, slow, deliberate, pulling free from mud with wet, sucking pops. My blood turned cold. I didn't want to turn. Every part of me screamed not to. But the sound drew closer, steady, patient. Finally, I turned. The fog shifted, and there she was, Clara. She stood just beyond the reach of the trees, her body caked in mud, her clothes torn, her hair plastered to her face. But it wasn't her eyes that froze me. It was the way her chest moved, rising and falling in perfect rhythm with the hollow's breath. Each inhale pulled her shoulders back. Each exhale slumped her forward, as though she were a puppet strung to the swamp itself. "Tom," she whispered. Her voice was hers and not hers, layered with the hollow's chorus. "Stay with me." My legs gave out, and I stumbled to my knees in the muck. My mind rebelled against what I was seeing, against what I knew. That wasn't Clara, not anymore. The swamp had taken her, breathed her into itself. And yet, God help me, I wanted to believe it. I wanted to reach for her, to pull her into my arms, to pretend we could survive this nightmare together. "Come back with me," she said, stepping closer. The mud clung to her like skin, dripping in thick ropes from her hands. Her face tilted in the same rhythm as the swamp's inhale. "It's easier if you don't fight." Something inside me snapped. Maybe it was love, maybe it was desperation, but I screamed her name and stumbled forward. My boots slipped, my arms outstretched. For one fleeting second, I felt her fingers brush mine. Cold, slick, alien, and then the swamp exhaled. The force knocked me backwards, slamming me into the roots of a cypress. The air tore from my lungs, my chest collapsing under the weight of it. I coughed, choked, clawed at the ground, my vision blurring. When I looked up, Clara was gone. The fog swirled, empty, silent, as though she had never been there at all. I don't know how long I lay there. Minutes, hours, maybe longer. The swamp's rhythm dulled, softened, until it was just the ordinary whisper of insects and the drip of water from the trees. The breathing was gone. Or maybe it had only fallen asleep, sated for now. When I finally forced myself to move, dawn had begun to cut through the mist, pale light bleeding into the hollow. My body felt broken, but I pushed forward anyway. I walked until the roots thinned, until the mud loosened its grip, until I saw the faint glimmer of a road ahead. My truck and RV were gone, swallowed whole. Clara was gone. But somehow, the swamp had spit me out. I staggered onto the asphalt, my clothes heavy with mud, my lungs raw. A car slowed as it passed, the driver staring at me wide-eyed before speeding off without stopping. Maybe I looked too much like what I had become, half alive, half something else. I collapsed on the roadside, staring back toward the trees. The swamp lay still, quiet, as though nothing had happened. No breathing, no voices, only silence. And that silence is worse. Because now, every night when I close my eyes, I hear it again, the inhale, the exhale, the faint tune hummed just under the breath. And somewhere in the chorus, Clara's voice calling my name. I don't know how long I'll last before I go back, because Cypress Hollow isn't finished with me. It never finishes.